Welcome everyone to a special review here at Point in Progress. I am one of your hosts, your doctor recommended dose of dirtiness, aka your nerd today, Carlos Rodriguez. And with me is our very own HR herself, Fiona. Fee, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk about all things horror.
Yes, we have a special horror themed review this episode. And finally, the bringer of chaos himself, Frank. Frank, how are you?
Good, good. I'm here. I'm glad to be here to talk about Cars.
Yeah,
Uh, the movie, not the vehicle.
Of course.
it's a horror show. At
And
least part two is.
I'm surprised nobody's made a horror movie version of Cars yet, like they do with like Winnie the Pooh and stuff. But yeah, now I'm excited to talk about horror games, man. Like,
Yeah.
I've played most of these, so I'm so happy to finally like gush about like a lot of these games that like nobody really talks about.
Yeah, there's some deep cuts because today we are talking about Terrorbytes, the evolution of horror gaming. We got a special review for this docu-series over from the director himself, Richard Moss. So shout out to Richard. Thank you very much. I want to disclose this is a special. We got, codes provided for the first two episodes as a 5-part docu-series. But also I think I have to because of YouTube rules and stuff. There is an affiliate link that you can check out the episodes, buy the 5 episodes if you want to see the whole docu-series, and it supports us here at Point of Progress as an affiliate link. Be down below. I'll disclose that like 8 more times because I'm sure like YouTube wants to hear all that, FCC, whatever, and FEMA. But yeah, we are talking about this docuseries, which what it goes, directed by Richard Moss, produced by Daniel Richardson. It was written as well by Richard Moss. The studio is Creator VC. There's so many cameos in here, so I'm not even gonna touch upon that. We usually have stars when we do movie reviews or anything like that. There's too many cameos. In the first 2 episodes alone, too many cameos. But, I saw this trailer and I immediately was blown away. I saw this, it was on IGN's, they have, like, a movie review YouTube channel and trailers. I watched it and I was like, "Whoa, like, this seems perfectly up my alley." And then I read a review over at, Bloody Disgusting, one of my favorite websites, and they were like, "Oh, you wanna support the creators? Here's the link," and they have an affiliate link as well. Click the link and I was like, "Wait, oh, wait, I can email the director? Let me see something real quick." And, just took a shot in the dark, reached out to Richard, and he was kind enough to send us the first 2 episodes for us to watch, and so here we are. Um,
Thank you so much, Richard. Appreciate it.
yeah,
That
thank you so much.
first two episodes were awesome.
100%. Yeah.
But yeah, this is really, really interesting. So before we get into our thoughts proper, I have something special. We're gonna all watch together. So on Discord, if you guys could watch the stream,
Let's see here. Pull up the
Okay.
old Discord.
and then
Oh, goodness gracious.
yeah, I know.
Why is he on a phone?
I, you'd be surprised. Apparently, we found out who his new boss is. So for everyone watching, this is a former founder. No, actually, he's still a founder technically, but former host Mario Rivera and his thoughts on terabytes. Once I get over there.
Yeah, but you told me I won't have to talk to these chuckle fucks ever again. But all right, well, whatever you say, Mr. Druckmann.
the hell?
Oh, 1 second. Hi, how's it going, guys? It's been a while. I of course been invited by Carlos to also talk about the documentary, and so I want to give some of my thoughts and what I thought about it, and maybe coalesces with some of the conversation that's already had. Of course, Terabytes is this documentary. I think overall it's a pretty solid entry level sort of discussion on all these individual games as well as the topic of horror video games in general. Of course, going through some of the biggest titles in horror, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, right? You kind of have to talk about those. I like that the format in a lot of ways is similar to a series I used to watch basically on TV called on A&E. I think it's called The Scariest Movies of All Time. They did a rerun of it actually on Shudder not that long ago where they sort of did a new version of the scariest movies. And I think it was like out of 100, I think it's 100 scary movies. In that format, it's very much like this, where it's going to be a talking head of somebody within an industry and them sort of talking and glamorizing the game as a whole. And I think that's totally fine format. I think that the games that they discuss are pretty much notable because, yeah, they're going to be the biggest titles. There are some instances where I wish they went a little bit more in depth with each individual title. I would have loved a lot more of a deep dive, even history on some of the things, like a little bit more than that. But of course, it's all based on who they talk to, their experiences, what they come across and the footage that they get. So I understand. Some of the people that they get are pretty notable in their own rights, as well as, especially in the second episode when they talk about, adaptation into, video game format. You got Corey Taylor in there. You got a couple of people that are pretty cool celebrities being able to be interviewed and talk about the thing they love, which is horror video games. So I think it's very cool that this exists and as a format, and I think it'll be a nice little collection once all the episodes are out, and I'm very curious to see what it goes for the next couple episodes. So yeah, those are generally my thoughts, and I leave it all to, of course, your fine people over here at Point in Progress. Hi again, looking at you. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But those are my thoughts, and progress has been made on my end, so take it back to you guys.
Who's talking in the background, Mario? I'm trying to figure out what they're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, that actually might be on my end.
Oh, is it you? Okay, I was
Yeah,
here.
I think that's my background. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Unacceptable.
So yeah, that is Mario's thoughts. Really brief, really good overview over that. I thought it was interesting too when I listened to his, talking about it, I forgot about that Shutter slash AMC series that went through like the history of horror and stuff like that. And that does kind of remind me of this. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen, there's another documentary this reminded me of, the two-part series. One focusing specifically on Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's like 6 hours long. It literally goes, or it's like 4 hours long. It goes through each Nightmare on Elm Street. Takes like about 30 minutes, 40 minutes each to talk about each movie leading up to the remake, and with some actors and stuff like that. And there's another one that's like 7 hours long. That's like Friday the 13th. This kind of struck me in that way. That's what this format struck me as. What did you guys think of the first two episodes and the format that we got?
I honestly I like the format a lot. I think it was an interesting way of being able to convey different topics and include games associated with those particular topics. I will say that sometimes it got slightly confusing for me because of the way that like they differ between like the topic itself and then like switching over to a video game. And then once I understood what was going on fully, I'm just like, okay, that like kind of going like there's the chapter and the sub chapters associated with it. And then once I understood that and being able to kind of hear people's thoughts and hearing like being able to see people who are now like big names in the genre, including like the founders of Dead by Daylight, talking about how these like older particular horror games really influenced what they are now working on and what they've created. And even getting other aspects as well, like the actual music and the like actual sounds and effects that go on in the actual games. I think out of the 2, I think both of them were fantastic. I really liked being able to hear kind of like the licensing as well, and I think that's actually a conversation that we've had quite frequently on Point in Progress, which is discussing the issue of being able to stay genuine with a specific like video game and then bringing it into media. I know that was a concern that we initially had
Oh
with
yeah.
like The Last of Us and
For
Fallout.
Kane when we talked about it.
Yeah, exactly, but then also seeing, like, when they take a I think it was really cool to be able to think about, like, they take, like, taking a movie IP and then putting it into a video game. Sometimes it's a hit and sometimes it's a miss, but that also gets highly affected on things like, is it made by people who are passionate about the project?
Yeah.
Because, yes, you could be given, like, millions of dollars to make an IP, but if you're not passionate about it, you're the players are gonna notice. So I think it was a really cool way to be able to separate those 2 episodes. I think the first episode itself was a kind of like a nice homage to the older games that are out there horror wise and what are essentially now the pillars of when we think of horror, of course. So it was I'm really excited. I want to watch the other episodes. Because it was just like I would like to say it was like almost like banger after banger. And then there was like times where they talk about a video game and I'm like, oh cool, but then they bring like the director of the
Mhm.
video game, and you're like, "Wait, whoa."
Yeah.
They had
There's
Jill
some cool
freaking
ones.
Valentine. She's
Yeah.
there talking about horror video games, and I'm like, "Wait a second." They had freaking Taylor from freaking Slipknot out of because they
That blew my
mentioned that
mind. That blew
they had
my
a freaking
mind.
collab with Slipknot, and I'm like, "What do you mean they got this guy?" Like,
Honestly, my favorite cameo was James Rolfe. Just
mm.
like
Yes. Yeah.
I know it's a deep internet cut, but every time I see the angry video game nerd, I'm just like, shit. I
Yeah.
love seeing that dude, man. I love hearing him talk. He's so good.
And I just appreciate it, like, and I definitely don't want to monopolize this by any means, but I loved how passionate each and every person was when they were talking about that, when they were talking about the games that they enjoy, and it wasn't so much the games that they even made. It was like games that like are in the genre itself that either inspired their particular game or had some sort of like nod to, or maybe they were like that was their very first horror game, and now they work on these massive behemoth of games. So
Yeah.
it's like it's really cool to be able to see like, oh, I get to talk about like where I came from, and now we're talking about where what brought me here in the first place. So
Yeah.
it was really cool.
I think it was really super cool when the guy who did Until Dawn was just gushing about Resident Evil 4. And
Oh my
you
god.
can
Yeah.
see, or I think it was Resident Evil 4, either the Resident Evil 4 or Silent Hill. But when Silent Hill was being talked, Silent Hill 2 was being talked about, a lot of the industry greats were like, yeah, this game was big.
Yeah, well,
Like, this game was huge.
Biles, who made Until Dawn and the Quarry, was just like,
Yeah.
Resident Evil 4 is like the best horror game of all time. Like that's legitimately like the best horror game I've ever played. And my notes, I literally put yes, Will, yes. Like
I-
heck yeah, it is.
It's so cool to see that. It's so cool. Like, I feel like that's one of the things you don't see like a lot. And you're starting to see a little bit more of it now on like Twitter and stuff like that I'm noticing from other like, now that you're starting to get more personal with who's making the games and stuff. It's really cool to see other developers gush about other developers' games like that, especially if you're in the same field, because then you can. I really want to go back and look at Until Dawn. Actually, you know what? Funny enough, the PSVR version of Until Dawn got leaked, like the original like
Oh
first
yeah. I just
version.
saw that.
And I remember looking at the footage, and now that I think about it, I can tell you right now, it definitely draws a lot of influence on Resident Evil 4.
Yeah. Isn't it
Before
crazy?
it turned into like the game that it turned into, where it's more like Heavy Rain like, it was definitely like you're holding a thing, you're walking up to people, you know what I mean? You're going into environments. It's definitely Resident Evil 4 inspired, at least.
Yeah, you could tell they had a general love of gaming, like and specifically horror gaming. I thought the format was really interesting. It was funny. Fee, I was with you when you messaged me yesterday. I was shocked at the length. Like I was like, wait, I was like, oh, 5 episodes. Like they're probably gonna be like 30, 40 minutes, and then pop into the first one's like hour and a half. I'm like, holy shit. Like that in itself is a full documentary on its own, like an hour and a half. And for that just to be one episode, I thought was really interesting. And it was once you watch it, you're like, oh, I understand why it's an hour and a half because you need to try to dedicate as much time to the specific subject because there's so many subgenres and things that have happened specifically in gaming that relate to horror gaming in itself that it was really cool. And it doesn't even touch, so many things. Like there's still so much that has left probably on the cutting room table. Like these guys have went above and beyond it. I could not like again, I know we have the affiliate link and everything. I want to disclose that, but Richard and Daniel like just did something really amazing, especially for us that love horror gaming. I thought it was really good. Let's get into the episodes proper that we got to uh
Sure.
watch. So episode 1 is titled Enter the Survival Horror. I thought that was a great way just to start in general. Let's talk about probably the most prominent genre within horror gaming itself. And yeah, man, the logo, that's what my notes here. I put the logo is dope as hell. You can see it
Mhm.
all in our review. We have a little PNG of it under us. Intro was really cool. And then in the prologue, we get to one of the first things we hear is Brian Gomez, who's a design director for Silent Hill Downpour, which I had not had the pleasure to play. Frank, I think you said you
Oh
played
yeah.
Downpour, right?
Oh yeah. I've I would spoil this part a little bit. He made me feel a little
Yeah.
bit bad. Because they mention in the video that people really didn't like Silent Hill Downpour
Yeah.
because it's very different and it's a different direction, right? They nail it on the fucking head where they talk about it because they're like anything after 4 loses its kind of Japanese influence and it's kind of getting shopped around, and it very much felt like that. Even though I did like Homecoming, I did not like Downpour, and I kind of want to go back now because now that I understand the influence and why it's different, and I'm at a different point in my life. When I was a kid, I wanted Pyramid Head and what Silent Hill kind of represented. You know what I mean? Even though now that I know that Homecoming changed all that kind of stuff to get Head in there, I want to go back and try it out and see what they were kind of going for then. You know what I mean? Because now that I know it's supposed to be different, then I want to go in and see what's different.
Yeah, and I apologize that we're kind of like skipping like around a
Yeah,
little
sorry.
bit because
Yeah.
I know in the second episode they even talked about the fact that like Downpour was made by Vatra Games, which is a
Mhm.
Czech studio, and then they were talking about the fact that like use your surroundings. Like it is like they were talking about the fact that like even just like down the street from the studio there was like a mortuary that was
Mhm.
just constantly like pushing out like black smoke and like
Yeah.
weird smells, and then
Burning
like
bodies.
yeah, and then it's just like all this, and it's like it's really interesting to kind of see the other side because I know a long time ago I actually watched like this 2.5 hour like it's a Silent Hill story summary by Suggestive Gaming, and it goes over everything, and it goes like into Downpour saying like this is not a good one, like this is one that people are not a huge fan of, and then they go into the reason as to why, but then they talk about like the game, like they're talking more about the story itself, not why it was not like
Mm.
universally liked. But
Mhm.
knowing that now it's just like, because knowing that they were like pushing like to get Pyramid Head into the game that you were talking about, Frank, and then this, it's definitely opened my eyes to like getting some insight perspective for sure.
Yeah, I thought it
But
was
yeah,
I thought it was really interesting, but I did want to touch on that because I before we started filming, Frank said he's played Homecoming and Downpour. I was like, "Ooh, I've never played either of these," so
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon this.
I've
Um,
I've had the fortunate I've been fortunate enough to play everything but Shattered Memories. It's just because I cannot find a copy on the Wii, and I think the last time I checked it was outrageously expensive, and I was like,
oh,
yeah,
it's
okay, I'm
it's
done.
dummy expensive. Yeah, anytime I see
I
it
do
on
have a Wii.
eBay,
I could just hack it, but I usually like to get my games physical if I could.
no, that's very
same.
fair. But yeah, I do like that Brian here. He has a quote where he describes that any new piece of media, whether it be radio, books, movies, horror is one of the first genre that uses the medium to tell a story, and
Mhm.
it's so true. It speaks so true. Like recently, just for context, I've watched the 2024 version of Nosferatu, but we all know that was one of the earliest silent films. That was like a brand new medium, anything like that. We know War of the Worlds was like a big thing that's all radio. That was like people literally thought was happening. Like horror is to be is seems to be like where you innovate. You have this new piece of media, so what's the first thing we're gonna do? How many DVDs, like the first couple DVDs that came out were probably horror movies, you know? VHS like survived as long as it did and became so popular because of horror movies. Like all these new media and horror is always there at the forefront and other stuff, but that's
Mhm.
not what this documentary is about, unfortunately. There's two things that always like, hey man, we had something new. Fuck it, we'll try it. But
Yeah.
VR, same thing. Like VR becoming a big thing back in the 90s and then coming back within the aughts and the 2010s and everything. That was a big thing too. We got the kitchen demo. Everyone was raving about the kitchen demo, and then it turns out, hey, the kitchen is actually Resident Evil 7, which they touch upon in this, and the history behind it. But I thought it was interesting that he mentioned that horror is one of the first genres to use the medium to tell a story. And I agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
Well,
Uh
even like
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry, I was just
No, no,
gonna
no,
say
go
I appreciated the quote at the very beginning from Yoshiro Komuro, which is I imagine the reason horror games remain a popular genre is that they are closely related to the essence of being human. So that was
Mhm.
like the very start of it, and it's just like that's so like I know like a lot of people do enjoy horror for like the pure like shock factor and like the scary like essentially like the overwhelming like just the jump scares and stuff like that, or like I know there are a lot of people who like and they almost say, and I think it's in the second one is like action horror, things
Mhm.
like Dead Space and stuff like that. But then like kind of going back into like the conversations that they even have in this episode, it's just like, yeah, it's like it's one of those things where a lot of horror is based off of like the human experience and not just like, oh, it's because it's creepy. It's like it's based off of like a real fear or like something that like an experience that they've had or something that could be like it grows from that, I guess, is an
No,
interesting way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Horror is very, very unique. You can do a lot with it. I personally like like the atmosphere of horror, right? I've talked about this many times on Point in Progress when we talk about horror games, and I still hold, and they talk. What's funny is that they say it exactly the same way I usually say it in this documentary, is that the atmosphere is what brings you into the horror, that fear of the unknown, right? That mystery behind it. It's not always about jump scares and how grotesque something is. It's the fear that you don't know what's ahead of you, and the fear of like unveiling what's behind like the door, right? The Resident Evil, the door is opening, you know what I mean? What's behind that door? The scariness of the door itself just opening, not necessarily what's behind it, right? um I love horror for that reason. It's always scratch that itch of like the murder mystery, if you will. Like, why are these monsters here? Who did these monsters? How do I survive? How do I let me break through this horrific event so I can find out the truth of what's going on here? You know what I mean? Or escape in some cases, in like a game like Outlast, for example. But uh, there's so many good ways you can change up the horror formula, and I love that this whole beginning of this first episode is just like the evolution of it, right? Like, we're
Mhm.
starting from Sweet Home, we're working our way up to like modern titles like Resident Evil 4 and stuff. But you just see that evolution of how far can we take this? How much should we take this? Because even some cases they even say it. They're like, "Are we going too far?" Um, but yeah, no, I love it. I love horror. I love horror so much. It's one of my favorite genres, especially in video games. And I love that these episodes kind of do different versions of it. Like, second episode being licensed horror, right? The movie games like, Friday the 13th and
Yes.
dude, I love that. I love hearing that theme too, because it was in Friday the 13th the game, and
Oh, I
it's
I remember
that's
people
the
talking
that's the
about
Jason I
that.
played. So every time I would show up and you just hear the theme.
Yeah.
um but yeah, no, like I love I love showing off the evolution of it. I tell people all the time that like we wouldn't have what we have without Sweet Home, and 90% of the people just go, "What the fuck is Sweet Home?"
Yeah,
So,
that's one I heard about from another YouTube page called Did You Know Gaming, and I remember watching like a full like 30-minute documentary about it and how it's like an adaptation of a movie, but like really seeing the scenes this time around and hearing the people who played it, I was like, wow, man, this looks so interesting, and just the for all three of us, people who love Final Fantasy and things like that, hearing the words JRPG survival horror game. And this is like what, like late 80s, early 90s. We're like, holy shit, like that should be something now that we play. Like there should be some JRPG like style survival horror game that we play. And the fact that they were able to make it look as scary as the movie, like the guy's face melting off or anything like that.
mhm.
And so many, it's crazy how so many of the themes that happen in Sweet Home get translated over to um Resident Evil. I thought that was really interesting. Now, Frank, you said you've had experience like seeing stuff for Sweet Home. Have you ever? This is your first time ever seeing anything for Sweet Home?
This is literally the first time I've ever heard about this game. Full stop. I've never heard of it before, but I know like the moment that they said it's turn-based, I'm like sold instantly. I'm a huge turn-based fan and I'm like I want to like I have no issues going back and playing like a old game like that because here's the thing, I didn't get to play these types of games when I was a kid. If I did get to play a video game, it was like Zelda or Pokemon. It was very like monitored type of like you cannot play any video games that include any sort of horror. So a lot of these games I've never heard of before. And it's kind of a bummer that I haven't, because it's really interesting to see, like, even that early on, taking a movie IP, even though it was, like, of course, in the West, not something that a lot of us had heard of. And then all of a sudden they come out with a game that's associated with it. And I think it's a really like innovative way of like handling it, and knowing now that like a lot of the clips in the game are like from the actual like are from the show, like not the show, the movie. So it's like it's heavily inspired by it, and then being able to kind of see that. And I think I could only imagine how like crazy that would have been at that particular time, having that movie being released, and then just knowing that there's a video game horror, like a horror video game associated with that like movie that you were just in, or a movie that you enjoy as a horror fan, and then being able to play that video game. Of course, tale as old as time, they've had video games associated with it, but horror as a video game at that point was a new idea. So that's such a
Mm.
cool thing to be able to see that. Um, so yeah, it was my first time, but I want to know more about it, especially with it being like a genre that I'm particularly a huge fan of. And then seeing like how creative it is, and the like the full like the trying to deal with the different ghosts and stuff, and the reasoning why they're in that house. So I am sold. I think that's also what sold me on this entire journey anyway, was like seeing these like like games I never heard of before, but now I really, really want to play it, because going into the next one, I
Yeah.
have always wanted to play Alone in the Dark. I've been wanting to check out. I didn't know that it was an IP from 1992.
Yeah.
I had seen the 2024 one, and I'd constantly see it on Steam on sale every so often, and I'm like, oh man, I should like. I almost bought it, and now regret it that I didn't. But now I'm gonna have to buy it, because I'm like I'm so invested now, knowing that it's kind of like a pointed it's essentially the original was a point and click. It was moving around
Mhm.
a house, trying to investigate. You're playing a character that doesn't really have like he's not like carrying around a gun, he's not doing anything crazy like that, but he's investigating what's happening in this how like this once again in a haunted house. But this like Lovecraftian kind of call out, and being like every room has something crazy and different going on. It's very much like House on the Hill, and I
Yes.
am totally invested. I'm like, I really want to play this. And I know when I was messaging Carlos, I'm like, Carlos, I want to play this game. I need to play
Yeah.
these games. I want like I am so invested, because it's like I've been wanting to, and knowing now that like I was surprised. I'm like, "Wait a second," because when they said like Alone in the Dark, I'm like, "I've heard of this before." And then I went to Steam and I'm like, "Oh, okay. This is like was like
There's like a million versions of Alone
there's
in
a
the
million
Dark.
versions
Yeah.
of this now. So it's as someone who has not played much horror, not just because like it's not that I don't like the genre, it's I get mortified playing these games. So a lot of times it's me either watching other people play it, or being able to experience it by watching friends on Twitch play it. And sometimes, yes, I have dabbled, and we'll talk about some of them that I've played, but being introduced to these like well-known like because when you think of like mainstream horror horror video games, you're thinking like Silent Hill, you're thinking of Resident Evil. So things like Alone in the Dark, I feel like are underrated, I guess. I feel like
Yeah.
there's an opportunity for them to become more of a in the spotlight. So I am fully invested. So watch out, because your girl's playing Alone in the Dark, and I'm terrified, but I'm here for it.
Yeah, we'll have to cover that on Point of Progress, because I agree. Like, we talked about it before Frank came on, and then Frank was
Yeah.
like, "I kinda wanna play these too." I was like, "Oh shit, hey, I think this
Yeah,
may
I
happen."
wanna play a bunch of these again. Like a lot of these
Um,
I haven't played in a while. Alone in the Dark being one of them. Alone in the Dark, I played way back in the day because I really wanted to try it out. This is back when I was on my big horror kick, going through all the horror games back in the day. But I just kind of I love how the documentary. I remember there's certain things in Alone in the Dark that I hated, like the movement. It's obviously very slow. And the way how kind of like the game almost is fighting against you in a very way to kind of almost push you into situations. I almost had to do the same thing to my cat a few minutes ago. That's why my door's slightly open.
I just saw him. I was like, "What the hell are you doing up here?"
Let's get him down. I love how that stuff is kind of explained in the documentary where they did testing and found out this, if you knew the game, you can just beat it in 20 minutes. So they slowed down the movement. They made it so that you couldn't really just finish the game early. And that's honestly a lot of early video games were like that because these games were at the time, like they're $60, $70 now, which is still a lot of money. But $60 and $70 then was a lot of money. It was, so they had to make these games kind of worth it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're going to get good reviews out there and everything like that, for people going to buy your game. So a lot of the way people did that was just make the game harder, right? Give you more bullshit deaths, make it slower. You know what I mean? And I love that was a design choice. It wasn't necessarily just like, yeah, we're just fucking with you. It was like, yeah, this character, he's in a big thing. He's kind of whimsical, so he kind of moves around almost kind of very weirdly. You know what I mean? But it's so cool to see how they took the limitations of like the software at the time and just made it into something like completely different that you were seeing at that point. Like one of the big things I love about Alone in the Dark and what it introduced to that genre is the perspective, right? The camera perspective. I urge developers to use camera perspective more in horror games nowadays. I understand we have thumbsticks, so it's easier just to look around and see everything. But games like Resident Evil 1, Alone in the Dark, Dino Crisis, Devil May Cry, you know what I mean? Like a lot of these games utilized like we're gonna control what we show you on screen, so you have that uncertainty of what comes next, right? Like I feel like with like that third person camera, you can always kind of shoulder peek of like, let me see what's around this corner, you know what I mean? Whereas in that period, you're just like, you hear a sound and you're like, do I want to keep going? Like, do I want to see what that is? Because it could be really scary, especially in Resident Evil 1, where you hear like, you know what I mean, something getting eaten in the background. You're like, where the fuck is that coming from? You have to go searching for it. You have to go through that fear, that little fear barrier of moving forward. And I think that's really cool. And I love that it started with Alone in the Dark, because I think that's that game always stood out because of its perspective.
Well, I think, like, and they talk about it as well, is the fact that, like, it was a kind of like an introduction to the walking horror game. It's like the nerve and concern about not knowing, like, the fear of the unknown. It's the sounds, it's the not knowing what's coming next. Because you see that a lot in things like the original Resident Evil 4, because of the tank controls, where there'd be times, and they talk about it in the documentary, where when you're shooting, it zooms in, and so then you can't actually, like, there's going to be jump scares because there's zombies coming from other sides of you, but you don't know that because you're zoomed in trying to shoot something else. I know that there is something that came to mind when you were talking, and it's not considered a horror game per se, but it was a game. It's called Dragon, which is a walking simulator where you go to this like very like rural, like the only way to get to this town is by boat. And you're trying to figure out what's happened to your sister. And so the entire game, it is a slow paced game, which definitely a lot of people, when you look at the comments for this game, it gets those negative reviews because they're like, the movement's too slow. And it's just like, that's the point. Like that's the, I think, and that was the same thing with the game, with Alone in the Dark, is it's that build up of like and suspense of what's going to happen next. Because a lot of the game, and they're talking about it, is a lot of times there's going to be nothing that's happening, but it's the suspense and the music and like the random creaks and like cracks and stuff that happen. And it's just like, it's so cool that they took that opportunity, and instead of like trying to make it like bulk out the game, because at that point the platform couldn't handle that much bulk, it's thinking like, okay, so we slow it down. That's the best way to do it. And then of course he didn't have a weapon, like, so he's just like
You can
going
defend
like this.
yourself.
Apparently he like does that like
like
old
Notre
Jotty
Dame,
like
like
yeah.
But
No, it's so cool.
I thought it was really cool. And then the more they talked about it, it's so easy to dismiss it for its graphics or anything of that nature. But we're looking at a game that's 1992, could not be played on systems, there's no way it could be played on like a modern system at the time, and it
Yeah.
looks unlike anything we've seen like in that genre or any in gaming in general at the time, and it's so innovative. Apparently it's won the Guinness Book of World Records as the first 3D survival horror game, so that's very interesting distinction
Oh.
too. And I think when they focus on this on the documentary as well as Clock Tower, that 1-2 punch of like really the beginnings of survival horror, I think it was really cool because there are also two. For the most part, I know it's 2025. We just recently got a new Alone in the Dark, but for the most part, there are kind of some series that have gone on the wayside, unfortunately, for so many. Like I know even the newer one like didn't get like raving reviews. But they are like these new series that like people want, like when they hear that name Alone in the Dark, there is this nostalgia factor to it, or you know of it because you've played Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dead Space, these titles, and the people who made those games are like, yo, I played Alone in the Dark. That's why I like this. So you have the
Mhm.
lineage of those games here. Um I would like to see more stuff like that. Like, I wish we can get a little more, of a clock tower again. It would be cool. Thank God though, this is not a endorsement in any sort of way of some fee. Because I recently bought Dino Crisis 1 and 2 on
Mhm.
good old games. They have a game preservation program, and I saw on there before we watched this anyway, it was funny enough. The first three Alone in the Dark games have been put and ported to mono consoles through GOG's game preservation program. So you can pick those up if you're interested, like we were watching this documentary, or if you always wanted to check it out. If you have a PC, I'm sure it can run it. There's no way that it's
Yeah,
not.
GOG does a good
Yeah,
job at making sure that
Yeah.
if they're gonna put it on their storefront, it's gonna run on your PC.
yeah,
It
100%.
and it's funny because, like, the first time that I've ever seen, like, Clock Tower was JonTron,
Ooh, yeah,
years ago, and he's like, "This is a man." And I'm like,
Scissor
"Wha"
Man,
and I'm
the
like, "Wait."
Scissorman.
Yeah, the Scissorman, and I'm like, "Wait a second, like, I know that, like, where have I seen this game before?" And then Lucas was just like, "JonTron," and I'm like, "Oh my god. Yes, this is like, I watch this guy play this game and constantly joke about the scissorman, and then it's just now being able to know like, oh, like just it's obviously I don't have the respect of the game like I should because I haven't played it. And then of course my introduction to it was more comedy based than anything. But
Hmm.
Yeah.
I like I once again I think it's really cool. Now we have games like Amnesia because it's like that
Mhm.
walking like what the like big baddie that you're trying to constantly avoid because the first Amnesia you did not have a weapon, you were hiding in barrels and you were
Oh,
hiding
yeah.
behind barrels.
Yeah, you're not
um
fighting. You're
Under
just
under
hiding.
under shit, or just under shit,
yeah,
yeah.
so
I
no.
I love that, though. I love that non-killable, like, central enemy that's always following you. In
Mhm.
a horror game, that's, like, amazing when they pull it off properly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I go back. It was funny because the next series they talk about is which is a little more modern, I guess, for a lot of our audience and a lot of people maybe with survival horror is Resident Evil. I always think of like Mr. X, especially in the new like
Mhm.
Resident Evil 2 remake, where he's just constantly on your ass. Every that whole section of the middle of the game is like you can't go to save room, you can't do shit. He's just there at every given turn, and it's like, God damn it, this sucks. But it's also amazing gameplay mechanic, and it's just constantly on edge. Like I knew for those couple hours, like there is no rest. Like there is only run, get what you can from this room, try to figure out the puzzle why this giant man with a fedora tries to kill you.
Yeah.
Um, but Resident Evil is such a touchstone in my life. And I like that they spent a good amount of time on the first game specifically because it is really interesting to see when like how scary that game was. Like it's easy to look at it now with 2025 eyes and be like, "Nah, I wasn't that scary." Or you can play the remake and that is frightening. But like
Mhm.
back in the day, man, when that first dog just jumps through the fucking window,
Wow,
it is
so
I
good.
remember jumping and screaming like as a kid, and I was like, "What the fuck, man?" Like it was unlike anything I've ever witnessed in my life. I thought it was the coolest thing. You hear like this band of like renegade, like almost like soldiers, like fighting zombies with guns and stuff, and trying to figure. And then there's giant tarantulas and snakes and all this other shit. Like it's really cool. They spent a good amount of time talking about Resident Evil, which I thought was
Yeah.
really. really cool and really important, especially for its legacy within survival horror. And I love they also kind of talk a good bit about Leon, who is probably one of my favorite gaming characters in general. And I love they talk
Mhm.
about how important Resident Evil 2 was as well,
Oh yeah.
having the dead dual playthrough as like Leon and Claire or Claire and Leon, depending on how you wanted to, and you got different things and different outcomes from like what you were doing. Like you did this here, so Claire doesn't have this, but now Claire has something else that, Leon didn't get. Um, did you guys, yeah, we've all played Resident Evil, right? The
We all play
originals and
Resident Evil.
everything.
I have a question for you though. If it's not too crazy to ask, how old were you when Resident Evil came out?
Was that
When you played Resident Evil?
96? I was probably 10 or 11.
10 or 11? Okay.
Yeah.
I was negative 1 years old
Yeah.
because I just realized that it came out a day before my birthday, March 22nd, 1996. I was born on March 23rd, 1996.
Jesus Christ.
But
Okay.
the reason I ask is because I
Mhm.
remember my dad playing this game. My dad had a PS1 and he played this game religiously. He loved this game. And I was morbidly afraid of it. Because
Yeah.
I would watch him play, and he would get to the first part with the zombie, and it would like turn its head, and I'd be like, "Oh, dude, I don't want to even look at this." Like,
Mhm.
I was scared of the movie Small Soldiers, let alone like because the way
Okay. Yeah.
way how hyper animated they were, I was like,
Yeah,
"That's
that's
fucking
fair.
creepy, dude." I was scared of shit like that. Like I was very, very timid as a kid. I was like, it scared the shit out. Everything scared the shit out of me. So even the cover of Resident Evil, the fucking zombie on the cover, my dad would have to hide the game because I would be afraid of just seeing that fucking zombie. Because like in my head, I'm like, what if zombie apocalypse happened now? You know what I mean? I'm just kid. What am I gonna do? You know what I mean? I don't want to have to
Adult
fucking
Frank's
live
ready.
this. Yeah,
Child
no,
Frank, not so much.
now shit, like I'll run headfirst into that now, but it I attribute Resident Evil a lot to my survival horror kind of journey as well. Like I didn't play it till years later, obviously, because like once I was like 10 or 11 or 12, I think someone had bought me a box set of Resident Evil games. It had Outbreak, Code Veronica, and Resident Evil 4. And I didn't want to play
So,
any of them because I was like, I'm still kind of scared of these games. And I think it after a while, I was like, you know, fuck it, let's just try it because I started to branch into it due to playing other horror games. Like I started playing The Suffering.
okay, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? I started playing more like kind of like games that were in that genre, and then I kind of warmed me up to that, and I came back to a lot of these games years later. So while Resident Evil 1 wasn't necessarily like my start, I went back into it and I was like, okay, I'm going to kind of overcome that original fear that I had as a kid. And, going back to it, it is definitely a fucking amazing game.
Mhm.
People shit on it all they want about the fucking voice acting, about the tank controls, about how hard it is. I don't care, man. It's all kind of necessary to be there for its time. You know what I mean? Because without a lot of that goofiness, without a lot of that kind of new way of doing that, like the tank controls and the perspectives and stuff like that, we really probably wouldn't have had what we had today.
Yep.
You know
True.
what I mean? Like it really did break that barrier to the West of like, yeah, this is like the horror games are here now. Like this now has to be emulated. It doesn't necessarily have to be just kind of played and forgotten. It's like now everyone in the industry has to react to it, and that was so fucking cool.
Yeah. Fee, what was your history with like Resident Evil?
So my first Resident Evil was Resident Evil 4, for context.
Great one sucks.
So great one to start.
Yeah.
I played on, I remember I had 2 save files. One was at my friend's house and we were playing on the GameCube. And like one of my favorite memories of all time when it comes to video games was when you're in the initial village, there is a way to get out of the town, but you have to go down this corridor. And if you go down the corridor, there is a guy with a chainsaw and he like kills you
Dude.
instantaneously. And my friend was terrified by that. And I remember we actually played a few like very like indie like Newgrounds horror games like a
Shout
few
out to
weeks
Newgrounds.
beforehand. And so like what we ended up doing was I kept running down that hallway and constantly getting murdered. And he's like, "Why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "This is revenge." Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
Mhm.
I had to play freaking Ex Mortis. You're now going to get the
Oh,
vengeful
not
like
Ex Mortis,
chainsaw.
bro.
Yeah.
Dude, that's a
Oh
Wow.
I'm
shit,
Yeah.
that's a
that
deep
is
cut. That's a
that
deep
is
cut.
it is a deep cut. And then I had I played through the game with some friends on the Wii. Because it was right around that time
Oh,
too.
yeah,
So it
that's right.
was being able to like experience horror in two different formats, especially in this with the same game. Yeah, that was my first introduction. Now, of course, I will definitely have to admit I have not played the original Resident Evil. I need to. It is on my I need to play list.
Mhm.
Because I've played through quite a bit of Resident Evil 7. Oh my god, I freaking hate it. I say this lovingly, that game traumatized me.
Mhm.
Not just
It's
What
because
was
but
it
it
the
was
first
in
like?
person?
VR. Well, it's not even the first person. Well, I played it in VR for a portion of it. But it
Yeah, I
was
couldn't
just
do that.
like I was just like, this is not worth it. Like, she is not worth it. We do not need to
No.
be
It's been
here,
4 years, move
girly.
on.
Yeah,
No.
it's tiring me. Yeah,
Like, why are you
just go home.
here? Like, let me in the Jeep. Let me in the white Jeep. I need to go home. Like, it's just no, but I love just I know they were a little bit corny. I did enjoy the movies as well.
Oh, yeah.
The movies were great. But I don't know. I really appreciate it, and I think it was really a really good shout out during this documentary. They mentioned the fact that like Resident Evil 7 and onward really brought the genre back to what it used to be. It was kind
Mhm.
of like the nod to like it's not like grandiose like guns and everything guns blazing. It's like in a smaller space, and I think that's what really like makes you feel even more like eerie and concerned because it's a lot of like silence, and I think that's also something that's really cool about this, and they talk about it when they talk about soundscapes later on. So I'm not going to try to jump into it too soon, but no, I that was my introduction, and it was a wild time. And I think like, and I say this and I will constantly say this, Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games. Like, it is
Yeah.
just
Oh, it's
God,
perfect.
it's so
It's
good.
almost perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
Like,
I
truly
didn't
is.
I don't really like to say games are perfect, but I think if you wanted to take what would be kind of perfect, it's Resident Evil 4. There's a reason why it keeps getting ported to like everything. It's like it's the new Doom. It's
yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's that fucking good.
Yeah, it truly
Yeah.
is, and I think it was one where you saw the evolution, as they mentioned in the documentary, where it was going toward, a little more gunplay, things like that, but it held on to that horror aspect so much so that it really worked. 5 and 6, I played 5, I did enjoy my time with it. 6, I just recently bought on Steam, so I think I
Mhm.
know it has its criticism. I do just wanna play it just to get it out the way and say I've played it. But 4 is just a truly special game to me.
It's a
It
it's
it
a
it
fucking masterclass.
yeah, and when we talk about Survivor Horror and watching this documentary specifically, it kinda remind me if you had to equate Resident Evil to, like, fast food. I feel like Resident Evil is almost like the McDonald's, right, of survival horror, where, like, it's your intro, it's, like, the easiest thing to get into, like, it's easy to find, most games, it's ported on every you can get a Steam Deck, you can get on, this, that, PlayStation, Xbox, any system has it. I'm pretty sure it's on the Switch, if not Switch 2 when it comes out, I'm sure there'll be some kinda collection, and it's everywhere, and it's easily accessible, and it's a great intro to horror, but what I found interesting was the next section, which, they focus on PlayStation specifically,
Mhm.
which the PlayStation, I feel, and I said this in my notes, like, between horror games and JRPGs, that's what built the PlayStation up to where we are now with the PlayStation 5 being as popular as it is, and the PlayStation 4, like, outselling so many, consoles back in the day. Um, we move on to Silent Hill. And this is where, like, the cameos, I thought we had some good cameos here, but seeing Yamamoka, like, come in, I was like, "Wait, you guys, like, got Akira Yamamoka to talk about Silent Hill?" And this is where the documentary, like, really sold me. I was, like, hooked, truly hooked,
Yeah.
like, I could not look away. Um, and then kind of focusing on some of the limitations that they had with the PlayStation, right? It's so funny because we have the similar, um section with Alone in the Dark, which we just covered, a lot of limitations are the reason why we have innovation. And
Mhm.
Silent Hill having this limitation that you can't see so far. So, well, what we're gonna do? We'll just put this fog. and it instantly becomes so scary and so atmospheric. I thought it was really interesting, and seeing it, and how much it really upped the horror game. Like, I remember being at ease playing Resident Evil. Like, I'm used to this. It was like, this thing scares the shit out of me though, Silent Hill. Like, I don't know if I could jump into this. Um, Fee, did you play any of the Silent Hill games?
Fun fact, no. But I have consistently watched documentary after like playthrough slash like story because it's the story itself has been really intriguing for me because I was a fan of the movies. And
Yep.
then because I'm not gonna lie, and this is me being a very big video game novice. At the time of when I went to the movies, I didn't know there was video games associated with Silent Hill because that's how detached I was at the time when I was like that was the late 2000s when the
Mhm.
movies were coming out, and that's when I was watching them, and now looking back, I'm like, "Girl, you are dumb. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how do you not know these were, video games?" But I wanna go back and play them because one thing is one of the games that I'm, like, most anticipating right now is Silent Hill F, which
Yeah,
is
looks
the
so
kind of,
cool.
like, taking it back to Japan and then having those, like, horror aspects and also all the warnings that they currently have, some people are slightly
Oh
concerned
yeah,
about.
it's like a
So it's
Surgeon General warning, like for the
Yeah,
fucking game.
so
like
I no, I think like I love the story behind it, and also I think one of the things that made me like quite interested in Silent Hill as well is how highly people talk about it and how people connect with the like either like the story or like are connected to like like I know for myself every time I see it's foggy outside I'm like it's Silent Hill like
oh, yeah.
instantaneously like doesn't matter what the situation is. And so for myself, I think like when it comes to just these like even like now indie games that are coming out specifically horror based, being able to see those like nods to Silent Hill. And I know you mentioned that like Resident Evil is almost like the McDonald's of it. I would like Silent Hill, I like as much as like some of the games were not as prolific as like Silent Hill 2. I still think it's on a I don't want to say it's on a higher caliber, but I feel like it has such like a because it doesn't like like and I don't wanna like dislike Resident Evil for the fact that it did go into more like heavy duty like shooting and like more like action based, but knowing that it kind of like stuck with this like more darker themes and there's a purpose of the town and like what's
Mhm.
happening in that town and how it circles around that particular person's sins and vices. And knowing that like, oh, you think that, it's, like, someone else or, like, someone else's issues and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and you're like, "Oh, no, 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 this is a self perspective," and being able to see, like, these are the sins of your past, and this is, essentially terrible things that you've been, privy to or associated with, but then I know later on it does delve into some other things that don't associate with that particular it's a whole
Yeah.
thing. Silent Hill's crazy, guys, but I love, and it's the same thing with things like Fallout and other games. Is like the lore behind Silent Hill is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And just like the story and everything else. And I recognize I do not handle horror very well sometimes. And I say this because I will like play it for a little bit and then be like, I feel like I'm about to die myself. So I put down the game and then I like go and watch a friend play.
Yeah.
So I definitely need to. And I know that like one of the biggest things about watching these particular hi, these particular, documentaries is how many games I need to play. Of course, there are games that I've like recent past, of course, we're gonna talk a little bit later on about like Dead by Daylight and knowing these particular characters, but I wanna be able to like experience it myself, even if it makes me incredibly uncomfortable. So who knows? Maybe I do a Silent Hill series where I just pull Frank and he has to hang out with me while I play Silent Hill. Um,
I'd love to go back and play some of them. I've already been playing Silent Hill 2, the remake
there you
Yeah.
recently,
go.
so
Yeah, me and
But yeah.
Mario completed it. We were texting each other like every night, like, "Where are you at? Okay, hey, did you do this?" And we got different endings for that game. We came from our initial playthrough, we had different endings. I thought it was really interesting. And you know how you mentioned you bouncing off what I said about the McDonald's thing. it's funny for me, Resident Evil is so visceral and Silent Hill is so cerebral.
Yes.
Mhm.
It just fucks with you in a different way, you know, like, it doesn't take away from, like, the fun gun action of this, like, yeah, you get guns in Silent Hill, but, like, it means nothing, you know?
Yeah.
Nothing,
In
none of the
a
weapons means
way,
that, you're just dealing with, like, the fallout of your, your actions, and it's so much more devastating. The ending of Silent Hill 2, even the quote unquote good one that I got, I was still like at the end, just sat there for like half an hour and just being like, fuck.
is that a good ending?
Yeah.
But in a way, I like to look at Resident Evil still, while being a horror game and still and breaking through that kind of barrier of horror for like, at least the American side of things, it it's still very muted in a lot of ways. And I think that's why it was popular, because while in Resident Evil you have, people getting eaten, zombies, dogs, monsters, um they would never at that point, at that time, at least until like Resident Evil 7, break into something like dead fetus babies or something like that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? There was
100%.
always this kind of almost kind of artificial barrier where like there's a line they wouldn't cross. Um and I very much remember this when Silent Hill 3 came out. Um they were hitting on a lot of topics that, wasn't necessary, was still kind of known as taboo through the gaming sphere, right? We're very open to talking about almost anything nowadays, but back then, even stuff like sex was a very big like deal, like the hot coffee mod from, or not even mod, but hot coffee stuff from San Andreas, you know what I mean? It got people talking. And I remember Silent Hill 3 being a very big thing in like news media, and my mom even come up to me and was like, you're not playing this Silent Hill game, are you? And I'm like, no, because it's one, too scary for me. I'm like fucking 6 or 7 years old. um but she, like, there was this like almost like panic, you know what I mean, from like moms, dads, and like the media, because people are getting subjected to these ideas that even movies didn't want to talk about, you know what I mean, even music didn't want to talk about, very very like horrific things. And Resident Evil would never do that. Resident Evil wouldn't do that until, like, I would say Resident Evil 7. There was horrific things in 5, 6, 4, and all that, but they didn't delve into stuff like that like gritty, visceral stuff that you don't want to talk about. You know what I mean? Like dead fetus babies, like in the PT trailer and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Um, it Silent Hill was always a league of its own, and I love that they address that. It's just like, while Resident Evil kind of was that breakthrough, Silent Hill kind of punched through a lot of the barriers of like, what can we really talk about in these games? We can talk about trauma, we can talk about, stuff like assault, we can talk about dead babies, we can talk about killing off, or mercy killings and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like stuff that you wouldn't really talk about in
Yeah.
Resident Evil. It was so cool.
And it's portrayed in such an interesting lens when it comes to Resident Evil. And one of the interesting things to move on to the next topic is they do this really great seamless thing because you don't think about it until after the episode's done, but it goes from Silent Hill 2 talking about the next topic was horror soundscapes and going right into Yamamoka talking about like changing music within horror games and how it adapted. And just recently playing to and having, the original themes play there. It's like there's some funky ass music playing there and stuff you wouldn't like feel like you would hear in a horror game, but it really works in this like soundscape and everything you do. And then I recently been playing with, especially if I'm playing like on my, on my, let's just say PS5 is connected to my computer and everything, and I had the headphones on. Dude, playing with headphones and the attention to
Oh,
detail that a lot of these games do, it doesn't get talked about enough. Like, I feel like every review needs to take, like, 2 seconds to be like, "Yeah, I played it with headphones for, like, 15 minutes, and this shit is insane." Because Silent Hill, Dead Space remake,
yeah.
which I'm recently playing, like,
Like the
these games
clanks
are
of the
so fun.
fucking of the ship moving, like in Dead Space,
Mhm.
like that shit's so good.
Or even, like, there was, like, random screams and cries in
Hmm.
Silent Hill 2 that they added, like, the developers added, and it just is constantly to put you on edge and just mess with you mentally, and you are going as crazy as James is, in this situation, or, Harry is in Silent Hill 1, and you're like, "The fuck are you guys like this?" It feels like torture in a way, but there's a beauty to it. Like they know what they're doing. They have their audience like so captivated. Um is there any like soundscapes like you guys think about when it comes to horror games specifically? Like do you guys want to shout out? Because those are the two more recent ones for me. Or a special shout out Resident Evil 4 and knowing Spanish. And they'd be like, I'm behind you. Like, yes, you are. Bam, shot in the face.
I'm gonna let you hit this one first because I'm gonna talk about this because this sound in horror games is a very big thing for me. Sound in anything is a very big thing for me, but I'm gonna gush, so I'm gonna let you take the
No,
reins first.
I want to hear you gush. Go
Oh
for
my
it.
god. There's a very stark reason why every time I do any kind of game review or talk about video games or anything that I always bring up sound because sound is prolific in just putting you in the mood of what they're trying to convey in a game. Right? I said it already, atmosphere. It's all about atmosphere for me in a horror game. And nothing gives you more of an atmosphere than sound. Having Carlos nailed it on that. Having headphones. I have two noise canceling earbuds, right? I make sure there's no other sound other than what I'm hearing in a video game. And in horror, it makes it so good, so immersive because you're putting your shoes into the character what you're playing as, right? And you're hearing what they hear, and its sound has only gotten better in terms of like gaming because it's directional now. You know what I mean? Like you hear something, you're like, "Fuck was that?" You know what I mean? Like you. One of the favorite things that people that always gets me every fucking time is when a game puts a knock in the sound and it sounds realistic so that always like I'm like what the fuck, oh shit, oh that's my door. Okay, no, that was in the game. Okay. It's a very big thing. The game that comes to my head very fast when I uh think about sound is Outlast 1.
Mm.
Outlast 1 is already a very atmospherically horror game where they give you sections where you're supposed to hide from stuff and run away, but for the most part the game is you walking through very horrific areas with a very low field of view because you're in a camera. You turn off the camera, you can't see shit in front of you. You know what I mean? So you're stuck in this camera. And what makes that scarier is that because you're very low field of view, because you're looking through a camcorder, you hear things every now and again, and you have to like look around. I mean, like you might hear a footstep, you might hear like something coming up behind you or something like that. It makes it very claustrophobic. I think that's a very big thing when it comes to if you're doing a horror game, you have to have some kind of level of like claustrophobia in a way. You have to feel almost closed in, right? Like Silent Hill does it through its fog, Resident Evil does it through its camera angles, Outlast does it through its camcorder like gameplay. But that claustrophobia really makes you kind of hone in on other senses, right? Because if you can't really see, you're thinking of other things, right? Like if I can't see anything, what can I convey? Oh, I can hear stuff, right? Evil Within does this a lot. I've been playing through Evil Within again for spoiler reasons. I've been working on some stuff with that. And they do that as well, where they'll shut off the lights on you and they'll let you just listen. You know what I mean? Like, what is that? I hear like a monster. I hear like this hissing sound. You know what I mean? Like you're following noise a lot of times. I'm trying to think. I had one more in my head that I was like, I remember this game being very audio heavy, and I 90% sure I'm thinking of PT. Because if you ever played the PT demo, you know
Yeah.
Yep.
that
Oh
they
my
use
God,
sound
yeah.
very like they use it as almost a mechanic. Whereas
Mhm.
Lisa sometimes be behind you and you'll hear it through your controller, like that like sound, right? Or you'll hear a TV turn on behind you and you panic and you turn around and you look at the TV, but then you turn around again and now Lisa's there.
Oh
You know what I
my
mean?
God,
Like
yeah.
stuff like that is like it's almost, I love it when games use the sound as a mechanic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It is very much the like as big as the survival part of it where you're hitting things or the movement. It's that big. You can have the shittiest graphics in the world, but if you have the best sound, I guarantee you will scare like a lot more people than if you had better graphics.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And honestly, it's funny that you asked this question because one of the very first games, and it's not considered a horror per se, but it is considered it's a dark fantasy, which is Darkest Dungeon. The
Mm, mm,
sounds in those
Oh yeah.
games is so visceral. This like, and it's funny because it was a discussion in the actual documentary, is the sound of a pig screaming. That happens so often in that
Mhm.
game, and it's just like this. And then, like, it's constantly li and it almost sound like honestly, it almost sounds like a person dying, and it's every time they're
Yep.
squealing. And what's even more interesting and kind of thinking about, oh my god, I'm just like, I've killed my throat making that noise, by the way. It's no, the idea because it's not even just like, of course, there's the visceral sounds of like fighting the creatures, but then there's also the background because you're constantly hearing people screaming. It's something that's like not really like paid attention to, and that kind of talks about the soundscape. Is like it's not something that people are blatantly listening for, but it sounds like you're in a dungeon. There's screaming, there's like ominous sounds, there's dripping. You're like like going through like wet puddles and like walking through grass, and even though like the first one, of course, is a side scroller, it's still very ominous. Like there's so many things that could pop out. The amount of times that I got scared playing that game, because I remember my very first playthrough of it, it was like 10 like hours of me sitting in Lucas's family's like living room at in the middle of the night because they had all gone to bed, and I'm just sitting there with like headphones on and like a blanket in the middle of a snowstorm playing with my little controller and getting spooked all heck because then there's like a pig screaming in my ear, or like randomly jump scare there's a bunch of skeletons, and like it was just like it's the idea of everything that you're not supposed to be paying attention to, which really like makes it. Of course there is Hellblade, which is a fantastic
yeah,
soundscape. Of
absolutely.
sadly I can't play that game because of the game mechanics. It actually makes me violently uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But that's motion sick 101. I just have to take some motion sick but meds. But being able to put on your headphones and like hearing the game that way is just phenomenal. And a game I recently played, which is Killer Frequency. I played that from start to finish last like 2 weekends ago. And it's just it's so like, I don't know if you guys have ever played that game. If not, that's a-okay, but it's just it's very like creepy because you're playing a radio show host, and it's like very campy like slasher. You're playing the radio show host, and then all of a sudden you find out the 911 is now down, like no one's able to make calls to 911, so you become 911. And so you have to like listen to people on the other side of the phone, try to save them from the serial killer that's trying to kill everyone. And if you fuck up, guys, it is gory. It is a very like, you hear them like getting like sawed in half, or you hear like the knife like stabbing into them. It's not just like oh and them screaming, like you hear the sound of someone, like obviously the person who put in the soundscape and the people who, the engineers behind it, took like a knife and like stabbed it through like a wet piece of meat or like some melon or something, because it's just so like gory, it's so wet, and it's just like, "Oh, this actually sounds like I'm hearing someone get stabbed while I'm on the phone with them." And as someone who has done that day job of talking to people over the phone, I'm like, "Oh, now I feel incredibly uncomfortable because I've
Yeah.
like, nope."
Who knows?
So
Yeah,
it's
right.
just
It's
it's
scary.
I mean, I talked about it one time. I like actually heard someone like they get attacked on the phone, and then the phone call went dead after the girl screamed bloody murder, and then they just like the line broke, and then they just like went like beep 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 beep. So it was just like, oh, this is making me feel uncomfortable. And I think sounds overall, just like definitely like music and games alone can make a game go from like really happy go lucky, and that's usually why when I play games and you see me on stream, I'm like singing 80s like ballads, like because I'm just like oh, here she comes. And I'm
Yeah.
like trying to go through and I'm like crying as I'm playing Resident Evil 7, or if I'm playing another game, I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. But no, I have the utmost respect for sound, because if you just close your eyes and you're in that situation, you're now that person. And so, like, shout out to them because it is absolutely crazy. And I think it was really cool also as well on top of it, because during that particular section, they actually had Jasper Bryan, who does the music for Hotline Miami, but he also did music for Lone Survivor. The music for Lone Survivor, you can tell it's almost like a level, like it's essentially like a shout out, or like they have some sort of, like, they talk about the fact they're inspired by Akira Yamamoka, because it's just like you can tell, because it has like that mix between two different genres and making it eerie, but then also having like some sort of like kind of like other types of music associated with it. It's so cool. So
Yeah.
I have, like, knowing that and just having that section, it's like, of course, I've always had that utmost respect for it, but I was so engaged in that section. I'm like, oh man, now I have to think about the games that I've played in like recent time, let alone from all time, because like it's not just the sounds that you're constantly hearing the music, but it's also like the like zipper unzipping in some like The Last of Us. They were talking about like it feels like you're there, because when you even just the subtle thing of putting a bag down on a table, opening that zipper, pulling out a paper, it's like if you didn't have that sound there, you get disconnected. But because
Yeah.
that sound's there, it's you're now in that particular setting. So cool.
Yeah, you're more
Yeah.
immersed. I think Hellblade is an interesting thing that you pull up, because that the next section, Lurking in Darkness, they kind of touch upon in the beginning some like non-horror games, but what they have horror elements. I think we talked about it before. The Thief is mentioned in this section.
Thief.
Uh,
I wasn't
which is
expecting Thief.
I wasn't expecting Thief
Yeah.
as well. But Hellblade is a good one because I played that last year for like I reviewed it last year on Nerd Today, and one of the cool things about that was playing with headphones, and her psychosis was starting to mess with me. Like the constant voices in the head just telling you you're not doing something right. Like I started questioning everything I was doing. I'd be interested to see. I haven't played two, so I'm really interested if that see if that carries over, especially with the ending that we got in one with like her having acceptance. But um another game they briefly touched upon here, and I think it's perfect for a sound escape specifically. And Frank covered it in his top
Mhm.
5 games. Hell, I'm sorry, not Hell, Hellblade, Half-Life 2, specifically Ravenholm. Like Half-Life 2 and Ravenholm specifically is one of the scariest levels I've ever done in any video game in general. The sound of the infected head crab guys just
Yeah, like,
screaming at you.
from the fucking from the fast ones.
Oh my
Have you
god,
ever
it's
have you ever do you know what they're saying? Have you ever looked
no.
into that? So the fun fact on the zombies of Half-Life 2, actually, they actually do have voice lines. They're reversed. So what they're saying
Oh
is, "Dear God, please help me.
my
Uh,
god, that's
God
worse.
help me." You know what I mean? Like, oh God, like they're screaming in
Yeah.
agony, but because they're getting infected by this head crab zombie, they speak in reverse. So if you reverse it, it sounds horrific.
That's even
Like
worse knowing that
yeah.
now. Um,
Um,
but one of the games they touch upon here too, and I don't know if you guys have any history with it. I only got to play a very little bit of it, and this is something I would love to see like a remake of it, maybe on Switch too. Who knows? They talked to Dennis Dyack, which is very interesting to talk about him because he's very like a poor man's I don't want to say Peter Moore, who Peter Molyneux, where he has all these
mhm.
lofty ideas and they never come to fruition. So, fortunately for so many games, and his first game, Eternal Darkness, is such a banger hit that it like it pales in comparison when we get like obviously I love Fable 1, 2, and 3. I talk about it a lot on programming that I'm on. But Molyneux has so many like lofty goals. Dennis Dyack, the fact that they got an interview with him, I thought that was one of the craziest gets for this documentary specifically. And I thought it was really interesting when they talked to him and they just because Eternal Darkness is a very important game in the history of horror video games specifically. It constantly just fucks with you so many times. I've
Mhm.
had the because I had a TV similar to the one that they have there, so the volume was similar. Like it was that green bar that kept going down. So I had that happen to me. I had the blue screen. I literally turned off my GameCube and lost hours of gameplay because of it.
Yeah,
because of
what if
the
the person smashes the GameCube against the wall? Like they're like, just let it happen, I guess.
yeah.
Like what happens happens.
Yeah, and then
It's so interesting that they talk about that game though, because it is one of the games that I personally go to when I'm like, hey, if you want to play like a very prolific horror game, Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3, Eternal Darkness, or like Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 2, you know, it's in the list.
Yeah.
And it's in the list because it does so many unique things that you don't see even today, even like today.
No.
There has been a sanity meter every now and again. Some games have done it, like Amnesia. Amnesia had the sanity meter too as well. I don't think it's done it to the same extent of how meta and fourth wall breaking Eternal Darkness was, and I think that's like what makes that game so distinctly unique in the horror space, is that not only does it fuck with you horror wise, like in terms of atmosphere, in terms of gameplay, in terms of all that, it fucks with you in the real world, and it pushes past a barrier that games don't really touch, which is like, we're gonna fuck with your save game, you know what I mean, we're gonna do this stuff that like Metal Gear Solid 2 was doing back in the day that
Mhm.
would kind of scare people, right? And I love that they touch like I can't remember the guy's name, but he touches on, he's like, I would really love to do horror games like this today. Like, let me
Yeah.
do horror games like this today, but studios look at like what Eternal Darkness was doing back then as kind of more of like a detriment to like the brand than something that's unique and kind of drawing into the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
it
it
was
kind of
Brian
sucks.
Gomez who
Brian
says
Gomez.
that
Yes.
he wanted he was hoping that he could do something like this. And honestly, the only thing I could think of that could get even close to kind of like fucking around with your game would be something like Doki Doki, because I know they play
Mm.
around with the save files. Also, Inscription has a little bit of that near the end. I'm not going to go into how, of course. But I think like there are a few games, but I don't think, and I agree with them, I don't think that there could be a game that fucks around with you as much as Eternal
Oh yeah.
Dark. Like there's no way for you to like the volume down. Like no,
Mhm.
like everyone's volume down looks different now. So you can't
Yeah.
really make that. Or like do it like having them like it looks like your screen turned off and then it turn it back on again. Like unless you're like the game could read like what type of monitors you have, which would be a lot of like internal like accepting a bunch of like allowing the game to be able to see so much of your computer.
Yeah.
But no, or maybe the game that like uses your camera so whenever you blink it changes. Like that's kind of like an outside element, but it's not like making you like it's not messing around with your save files or anything like that. So dang, I wish that there was a way to do it nowadays. Of course, you know what? Someone who and I imagine it might be even just like an indie developer creates something that just completely messes around with things. And I want to see that for sure. But it's also kind of goes down to security now, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Which might be a
Yeah.
big concern for some people.
Yeah, I think it
It's
was
very
easier in
hard
the
to do that cool stuff.
2000s. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's like you have games like you said, like Doki Doki, who do try to do whatever they can with the cool stuff, like reading like your the name on your computer and stuff like that. I mean, stuff that's like kind of surface level.
Yeah.
I really wish more games would do it. There's one that I think of very often, which is I never remember the name. I always have to like go on this big like search for it because it's so like low key, but it's basically a game where you play as a guy, you go into this farm. It basically looks like someone's been murdered, right?
Okay.
And you go down and you meet this man. He has blood all over him and stuff like that, and you you choose whether to stop him or to let him go, right? And if you
Sure.
let him go, you get then pushed in more into the dungeon, and you're met with this dilemma, and you may or may not have to kill somebody. But it's a more of like a mercy killing. It's more of like oh yeah, it's not like a bad killing. You know what I mean? Like you're not necessarily a bad person for this. You're more just like putting somebody out of their misery, right? And then you go back and you find out that you are the person who that original dilemma is. But the way the game plays it out is that you can't go back and change your choices, right? It's more of just like a social experiment. And the game literally locks you out of coming back into it. You play it once and that's it. It's done. You can never come back to it again. And stuff like that is like, that's so fucking cool. It's unrealistic to have a game lock you out forever and never
Yeah.
come back to it. But it is still really cool that there's options to do stuff like that, and I really wish games would leverage that because, like you said, Doki Doki does a really cool job at it. I think it even adds like TXT files to your computer, like
Oh shit.
it'll add files to your computer and like just like notes and shit like that, which is super cool. But again, some stuff you're not going to be able to do on an Xbox, stuff you're not going to be able to do on a PlayStation. It was kind of very computer specific. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
I think mechanic wise too, I think it was really good to then focus on in this section Fatal Frame, which is a series I unfortunately have never touched. It's always one that was on the periphery that I always wanted to play. I put in my notes, I was like, this looks like a fiasco game. Fatal Frame.
Yeah, I wanna like, I've seen people play it previously, and then now it's on my like, very high on my radar. I would, like, cry the entire time playing it, but I'm so down to play it because and then I would be like, "Okay, pose," and then try to get, like, the ghost to, like, I was just like, "I
Like
didn't get a
kawaii
good
pose.
enough angle." Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like it's just like, "You're not murdering her well enough, you have to, like, put your hands like this to get a better photo." No, it's things like, I love that ingenuity because, like, there's obviously games like Pokemon Snap, and there's these, like, photo games that, like, everyone loves, and then taking that idea and being like, "But let's make it horror." And make it really
Fatal Frame.
creepy and make you feel incredibly uncomfortable. And I think that's such a cool way, like a different mechanic. And I love when like people who make video games think of like taking an idea and just like putting it on like either like flipping it and then making it completely different or finding an like very like innovative way of implementing that particular mechanic. And this was such a cool way of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's one, and I think there's a new one coming out soon, or at least a
Mhm.
remake, and I think it's a good time to have, it, especially with the the resurgence of horror within gaming, especially when you have PC and a lot of the indie space doing very interesting things. We touched upon the Silent Hill's Journey to the West in the beginning, so we can skip over that portion. But it is them trying to talk about the difficulties had of trying to differentiate from the Eastern counterparts that they had, and it to varying levels, it going good, not going good, and we all agreed we kind of want to like take a look at these again because I remember that's when I had money and I was like, oh, I'll buy these games, and then the reviews were so negative. I was like, I'm gonna save my money on these. But now I think maybe a good time to go in and jump into Homecoming and Downpour. I know Shattered Memories always had a good one, which is interesting. We were talking about that, but that's hard to find. That is
Yeah,
very
it's very
difficult to
hard to
find.
find. And
Um,
Homecoming is very interesting because it's like I like Homecoming until I played Silent Hill 2, 3, and 4, and I'm like, oh, I hate Homecoming now.
right? It's like
It's
one of
like
those things you're like,
I can see why people didn't
yeah.
like this game now. Like now I have problems with it.
But it'd be interesting to see it in 2025 eyes. And not that you get that like you get that love. Speaking to seeing Brian Gomez talk about like his love for it and everything like that, you do get like that sympathy. You're like, oh yeah, this is something made by a group of people, and this is where Konami's gonna Konami, unfortunately. So that is where they're like, oh, let's do this. You have to do this because this is Silent Hill. It's like, well, Silent Hill, you already established is whatever the fuck it is. Like, it doesn't matter. It's like a
Yeah,
representation of
we
this
define
person's.
canon.
Yeah. So why does it matter like what this is like unless it's intrinsically attached to a character before, like it doesn't make sense. I do want to touch upon the epilogue and then we'll move on to episode 2 of the docuseries. Um it ends with this interesting way it talks about like the death of survival horror because of like games like Resident Evil 6, them going more actiony. That kind of was, and I mean, I again being a huge Resident Evil fan, I didn't buy that day one. I'd never played it. I literally just bought it
No.
recently because I got a Steam Deck, and I was like, oh, it's on sale on Steam for $10. I'll buy it. I can play it on my Steam Deck and just whenever I want. I haven't downloaded it yet. I haven't played it yet, but still, like now feels like a better time to revisit that game with, especially with all like the knowing that there is a rainbow on the other side, that there after the rain, there's gonna be this beautiful game that is Resident Evil 7 and Village. Um, but they have something interesting that they talk about, and it's the death of survival horror and then the rise of Souls games. And I thought that
Mm.
was an interesting correlation between the two, like seeing them die out, and then Bloodborne is the first thing that always pops in my mind. The most time I spent in the Souls like game. Um, how horror just how horrific that game is, and like the sounds of Yarnum and playing as like your character and walking around, and there's just so much fucked up shit happening in Yarnum at any given point. And again, it's like a perfect encapsulation of like the soundscapes that we talked about, like the attention to detail, the atmosphere that we've had with like Silent Hill, or the gameplay mechanics that you have with Resident Evil. It's perfect. And I know this is like the only section I would like throw Harv in, because he's a Souls guy, right?
Insert Harv
It's out of
recording.
nowhere, right? But
Insert.
2-hour-long Bloodborne analysis.
exactly. But it's interesting that like, not that it's like horror specifically other than Bloodborne, to me at least, but there is this need to have some kind of atmosphere, some kind of like horrific thing. Like we craved it so much, and then the indie space started opening up. And I know one of the future episodes does cover that in length, and I can't wait till the full documentary series is out, because I think that that episode specifically is gonna be really interesting. Um, but I thought it was just a cool touchstone to end like the first episode with the like the death and then rebirth, but in between we have this like Souls, generation coming up, and like talking about difficulty and atmosphere, everything like that. Any go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, goodness gracious, no worries. No, I agree. And like that's the thing. Like watching this documentary, like what even just watching both, it made me truly realize that I am definitely not a huge horror action fan. I'm
Mhm.
definitely more of the survival horror, like what's lurking behind the shadows, kind of like trying to like it's definitely more like story based for me. I need to have like a really good plot, and I need to be able to like be very like interested in the details, of course. Because even for me, like one of like I would consider even one of my first horror games was Ex Mortis, which was a wild way to get into horror, guys. That
Newgrounds
is
horror was crazy work back then, because there
Dude,
was there was no boundaries. There was no, they talk about
it was
anything.
so messed up.
Child
Yeah.
murder, everything was on the table.
and that's the thing, like if you ever have the opportunity to play Ex Mortis, guys, that game gave me nightmares for
Hmm.
not months but years. Like that
Mhm.
still haunts my
It's
memories.
messed up.
It's messed up. There's multiple of them, and it was like it didn't even help that like right after we played that, I remember we went biking in the woods in the dark. So I nearly like lost my like just because of a heart attack. It was just not a good time for me. But no, it's just like those types of games. It's the walking horror. It's like like it's not so much like what you're seeing right in front of you. It's not like the massive fighters. And quite honestly, I like if I do play an action horror, I'm more of a I want to play it multiplayer. Like we have like Left 4 Dead 2. I want to like go through and like attack like a bunch of zombies and just
Oh,
like
I'd
go
love to play Left 4 Dead 2. What the
just,
hell?
Mm.
what?
I would love to play Left 4 Dead 2.
I used to play it with a few friends like all the time. Like I think that's like it's a game that like when I think of like if I have to go on a like a murder spree of a bunch of like monsters and like horror, I want to do it in multiplayer. That's the like that's how I would enjoy it, but survival horror is like I'm so happy it's come back. I'm saying this as someone who can barely tolerate going into a horror game without crying. Cue like the clip that does not exist of me like legitimately sobbing when I played. Oh my gosh, my friend thought it would be a great idea. Put all the blinds, like blackout blinds, put
Ooh.
me with these like noise canceling headphones, and then put me in a room by myself in the dark to play Amnesia for the first time.
Oh
And I
yeah.
Oh
cried.
man.
I sobbed. So I have a little bit of like I get stressed out playing like even just like little games, and I think it was really funny that they're talking about like games that are not horror but are considered horror, because that happens to me all the time. Like I'm scared of playing like freaking like Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney because of the freaking like bluey kind of just the blue badger. If you know, you
Oh,
know
you're
that
talking about it.
entire. Oh, so it's just like it's scary to me. So I think like the survive. I'm happy that survival horror is back, and thank you indies
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
for making that happen.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
100%.
Honestly, one of the first thing I think about when I think about indie kind of horror games that kind of brought the genre back in a time when this was around the time of Resident Evil 6, I believe, because I was still in high school. Slender. that
Yep.
the free Slender
Yeah.
game that everybody
Yes.
was playing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Five Nights at Freddy's. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
people have hate for those games because they're they it feels like they're very kiddie because yeah, they came out at a time where like kids were kind of getting into it, like high schoolers and shit like that. But I think they draw upon a lot of what makes horror. Like atmosphere in Slender is crazy because it's just like a flashlight, someone following you. You can't turn around, you can't look at them, and you have to catch these pages. You know what I mean? Or even Five Nights at Freddy's, who take the movement all together and it's just cameras. You know what I mean? Like they're really cool ideas within the horror space, and that might not work for a grandiose like AAA title, but for something that's like a 20-30 minute like indie game, it's fucking perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
and we're seeing a lot of that even today. A lot of these
Well,
newer games just kind of doing things that they want to do, even if it's 20-30 minutes. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, like, even with, like, your mentioning of Five Nights at Freddy's, like, there are games that are inspired by that particular gameplay. We saw it last year with Zoocosis because,
Mhm.
for context, that is a night security guard working at a zoo. Of course, there is a lot of, like, first person walking around the zoo and you're injecting you're trying to figure out which animal is infected, but there is that aspect of sitting in a zoo and trying to figure out what's happening and looking at screens, and it's even with like Killer Frequency, yes, it was a 1980s like radio booth, but you're sitting in that booth and you're taking phone calls. A lot of that particular game is sitting in that one particular space. Of course, there are aspects where you actually have to walk out of the booth. But it's the same thing with Five Nights at Freddy's. There is the doing everything with the screens, but then there is some movement in the later games. So it's really interesting to see, like, even these games that a lot of people are like, oh, it's not really cool. It's just like, but a lot of horror games are now being inspired by these other games that have like changed things up. They've broken the mold, they've done something different. And I'd rather play a game that's different than have like the same exact game over and over and over again, because we see that with other genres. So I think horror is such a great opportunity to be able to mix things up and change things up, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, even games like Lethal Company. Like now I
Mhm.
think about it, like Lethal Company is technically a horror game. Even though we play it, we have more laughs than scares, but in reality you're venturing into the unknown. You have no information, you're fighting these unkillable monsters, and you have to escape with money. You know what I mean? Like it's a horror game when you think about it.
Yeah.
Just a different type of one, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, and it does end in a really good way. Talking about the Phoenix rise of survival horror, and um, I think it was a really interesting way to end the first episode, and one of my for context, we didn't get the other three episodes, but episode 4 is titled "The Indie Influence." We could talk about it a little bit at the end of episode 2, but moving on to episode 2, this episode specifically, it's a shorter in length, which is nice. I wouldn't
Yeah,
have
this
mind
was
an
only
hour
an
and a half,
hour.
but it wasn't only an hour. This one's called Lethal Licenses, which we talked about at the top of the show. There were so many games listed on here, and similar to what you said, Fee, and when we were covering episode 1, this documentary made me more have a list that of games I want to play. Like, there were so many games,
Yes.
or I didn't even realize, like, I didn't know there was a Halloween game for Atari until I watched Angry Video Game Nerd back in the day. I
Mhm.
knew the Friday the 13th because I remember seeing the box art in Nightmare on Elm Street, like, as a child. There was a
Yeah.
fucking Psycho game? They made a Norman Bates Psycho game back in the day? What the fuck? This is so crazy. There's
Yep.
so many really cool things, and the prologue talks about a lot of the earliest versions of licensed games. Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you're playing as Keanu Reeves punching bats. It looks like for the 3DO or something, or like the Jaguar, the Atari Jaguar, or whatever the fuck it was. There's so many interesting things, and this is a quick shout out for any of my people who live in the Philadelphia area. Um, there is a game that they talk about in here, which is it's also I think it just came out as a remake or a remaster. I have no mouth, therefore I must scream. Um,
Yes.
this game, watching this looks so impressive. It is so cool to see what they did here. And this guy, the original writer, Harry Ellison, they talked to him, and I have vague memories of the show that they show clips of. it was a sci-fi show where they talked about sci-fi talk, and they talked to the writer, and he's like kind of shitting on video games at the time. But then he's like, well, fuck it. If you know, I think video games are shit, why don't I just make my own?
Yeah, why
And
don't make it better?
yeah, and then he adapts his own, gets a team and adapts his own book into a game. This like I've never heard of until this documentary. But for real quick, the host of that sci-fi show is in our local Fox area station, Fox 29. Is his name's Mike Jarek. And I literally out loud watching the documentary was like, "Is that fucking Mike Jarek?" Like I've never seen him.
Is that a
This
local person?
this dude is wild on Fox 29 morning shows. He for the Eagles Super Bowl, before we get back into the episode proper,
Yeah.
for the Eagles Super Bowl, they start at like 5 o'clock in the morning of the episode. They're in New Orleans because that's where the Super Bowl was held. And they played off like his co-host Alex, who's younger. She's like, "Where the hell is Mike?" And he just pulls up with these three girls wrapped around his arms, face full of he has like a beignet in his hand. He's like, "I've been out all night. This place is amazing." Like, he's just
Seeing this. Oh,
yeah,
that's him?
yeah. Yes,
Oh
that
my
is him.
god, and then
That
he's
is Mike
covered
Jer
in, like, sugar, and they're
Yep.
like,
Mm,
"What is this?" And then he's just like, "It's the beignets," and they're like, "Oh yeah, beignets," and I'm
yep.
like,
He's wild.
"Oh my
He's
god, I've
wild.
seen this clip."
He's great. Yeah, but I saw him. I was like, "Oh my god, I know you did other stuff other than just Fox 29 News." So, yeah, as long as I've known him, is like he's been on this channel. But they do talk to Harry, I'm sorry, Harlan Ellison about the game, and this is the one game that stood out the most to me watching
Mhm.
these 2 episodes. I was like, "I don't know what the fuck this is, but this seems so interesting, the concept behind it and how they tackled adapting this book." I've never read the book for full context. I've never played this
Me neither.
game. I literally popped up on LinkedIn earlier today, and I saw a post from, like, Night Dive Studios about, remaster of this game. I was like, "How?" It's like, was this coinciding, the documentary, with this? Like, what's going on? Like, I need to play this.
Is there
Like, how did you
if people
know?
really want this game? Like, is it that popular?
But it seems so interesting as like a point and click game. I know if you wanted to talk about this before this we recorded, so go ahead.
Okay, as a huge point and click adventure fan, guys, this is like I like lost my mind. And then what's even more hilarious is I went out and I told Lucas, I'm like, I need to play this game. And he's like, "You've never heard of this game?" And I'm like, I have never heard of this game in my life. I am known for playing point and click adventures, and I feel so silly. I've never played this before. I'm like literally on Steam right now buying it as we're talking because I'm like, I want to play this game so
Yeah,
badly.
it's
I think it
$3
it's literally
as of filming.
yeah,
$3.
it's $3, and came out in October 31st, Halloween, 1996. But no, I love these types of, like, trying to move around. Of course, I've played a multitude, and shout out to, like, gives me it's very reminiscent to a game that I've talked about and actually was, has been consistently on, like, my games of the year, which is, like, the Blackwell series. So
Mm,
it's like very much like it's very haunting. It's very much like it's talking about like essentially themes that are very awkward. Of course, in this case, it's the idea that there are only 5 people left on the planet, and why are these 5 people still alive? And trying to maneuver through their stories, and try to make like, are you making the right decision? Who knows? But it's just even for the time, it looks like a really freaking great game. Like the overall like overlays and everything look phenomenal. Like the idea that they're remaking this, I'm like, I kind of like the charm of what it looks like right now. Because there are games that are coming out in 2025 indie wise that look like this. This is what
Mhm.
they
mhm.
aspire to. So knowing that they want to remake this, I'm curious how they would try to make that. They because it does also kind of read like an old like Fallout game, to be quite honest. So I'm really interested to see what they do with it, but like I'm fully invested to play this. I might actually play it this weekend,
Yeah,
just
That'd
because
be
I want
cool.
like
I'd watch that.
yeah.
yeah. I think that was like like I thought going into this, especially with the fact that I was so interested in like Alone in the Dark. I'm like, okay, we talked about some really interesting games like the first episode, but that I was fully invested in the fact that the person who originally made this game, like who wrote the story, was not invested in video games, but then went up to bat when he like one of the themes and plots of the a video game they wanted to remove because they're like, it's glorifying that particular aspect of history. And it's like, no, it's the complete opposite. It's like showing how depraved, how terrible these particular acts were. And it's so interesting that it's been a consistent issue, tales old as time, when it with video games,
Mhm.
where a lot of people think that video games are just either stupid or that it's just for children, or and then they like the moment that they see something like this and they're like, oh, you're getting into topics that are like uncomfortable. Of course, in other like countries, you're allowed to get with a little bit more. And I know that the topic in this particular game is definitely uneasy, but it's also recognizing that terrible things have happened in history in the world.
Yeah.
And so just being it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier on, is like it's the human experience. It's not like, of course there is that horror aspect, but it's like a reflection of like these are things, or like it's supposed to get them to go through their sins. It's supposed to be like, this is the terrible shit that you did when you were alive, and this is like a manifestation of that, and they have to face it, and it's kind of terrifying to think about. And I know one of the clips that we saw was a girl was stuck in an elevator with like this creepy guy, and I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
very interesting what happened there. Like there she ends up like punching him in the face, and then the creature kind of like dissipates, but like what happened? So I am so invested. I've like got giddy seeing this, because I'm like, I have never heard of this point and click. I'm always looking for a great point and click, and being able to see like how positive the reviews are on Steam.
Yeah.
Everyone's like raving about it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, it
Shout out to Night Dive Studios, who is one of the, I would say, one of the more premier publishers recent memory, who are trying to
Oh,
find
yeah.
these games and adapt them, even if it's something like a known property, right? Like, let's say, obviously we're talking about horror, but let's say Star Wars, right? So many of these PC Star
I
Wars
think
games that
they
got
did what,
lost.
Dark Forces,
Dark
right?
Forces
Dark
was a new
Forces.
one.
Yeah.
They just did one. Even some of like the prequel series games like Bounty Hunter and things like that. Like,
Mhm.
was it well received back in the No, but listen, there's an audience for it, and it's not a cash grab. Like, you could tell they actually care about the IPs that they're picking
Oh yeah.
specifically. So for them to be the studio in this, like, it totally
If
makes sense.
well, like
if
shout
they're
out to them.
remastering it,
Oh,
oh
sorry.
sorry, Fee.
I
Go
was just
ahead.
gonna say shout out to them, because they currently have like Night Dive Studios has a pack of 5 games, and it's just $7
Oh yeah,
Canadian.
no,
Like
because
that's
they're they very much it's a remaster in all senses, like because they make it work on like newer monitors and stuff like that. Because if you ever try to play any of these games, you're probably open up DOSBox, or it might not be at the resolution that you wanted to, or something like that.
Mhm.
So they go in and they kind of remaster these games to be at that kind of level. You know what I mean? And they don't really change a lot. You know what I mean? Which is good. So that remaster of this game should just be an up-res version of this game. It should look exactly the same by the end of it, right?
yeah.
Um, the only time I've ever played anything Night Dive though was Blood Fresh Supply. So
No, yeah, yeah.
um, I have very limited view of that, but from what I've seen, all their games look very much like the original game, just like enhanced for modern monitors and stuff like that, which is cool because they also have Blade Runner, and I haven't jumped into the point and click genre, but kind of want to jump in for
Do it.
Blade Runner.
Do it. Do
Yeah.
it.
The
Do it.
In the next section, when they talk about Pages of Fear, one of the games they highlight on here in a big section is John Carpenter's The Thing, which Night Dive
Mhm.
just recently released. Like, that's also on sale on here. I just saw on Steam, and they just recently released it. And I remember that coming out for Xbox, and to see the how long it took, like, the development time, and that's one of the best things I see with episode 2, specifically when it talks about the licensed game, because again, it is so easy for us to shit on licensed games, right? There are very few that are fucking amazing, and like, I always think about Chronicles of Riddick. Both of them are just amazing games, but like,
Mhm.
that studio, what else have they done that is absolutely amazing? Like, they knocked it out of the park with this, but how many other licensed games get the shaft, like Spy Hunter, with The Rock, or something else like stupid like
Oh
that?
God, Spy Hunter! I remember
Yeah.
that one for the PS2.
Oh my god! But they highlight these specific games, right? Like the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and The Thing, and these are the two that jumped ahead of all these games. And the fact that with The Thing, they really took the time to really show love to the movie, the premise of the movie, incorporating stuff from like the book in the 30s, adaptation of the book, and then now the more modern, what we know and love with John Carpenter's The Thing. And it having unique systems, like the fact that in the game is similar to the movie where you are starting to worry about the people around you. Are you human? If I make the decision to help you, is that are you the alien? Like, am I making that decision knowing you're the alien and you're gonna like you it's gonna lead to something else, or am I dooming us all by helping you for 1 second? And that paranoia that starts clicking in, I thought it was really interesting. I remember a lot of reviews of it back in the day, like seeing X Play and things like that, talk about how interesting it was. And some stuff didn't like knock it out the park, maybe like control wise or anything like that. And that's perfect in a landscape that is 2025 with a studio that has Night Dive as a publisher to then release this game. Be like, no, no, there is an audience for this. This game is special for a reason. Let's show you again why. And yeah, it might not be a 10 out of 10, but when we're swimming in sevens, that's perfect in 2025, you know? I think
Yeah.
that is a really good and they really took the time in the documentary to talk about this game, and one of my notes here is like, "Damn, they're really selling me on this game." And I immediately remember, like, seeing, I don't know her name's Morgan, Shaver, I believe, who works at Night Dive, she's PR, and seeing her talk about it on, like, Facebook and, LinkedIn and stuff, I was like, Do I have to buy this game?" Like, this documentary is amazing and at the same time the worst because it just made me a list of games I need to buy. So
Mhm.
that's the only uh, critic thing I will say about this game. This documentary is like I just want to buy all these games now, even the shitty ones they talk about. Because the next one, which is a section I touched upon, like in my notes at least, I have a lot of notes on. It was Lost in Translation, and they talk about a lot of the issues they had developing Buffy games and
Yeah.
how the studio was like, "Oh, I just played this game called Metal Gear Solid. I don't know if you heard of it." And they're gonna be like, "Yeah, I heard of it." And so Buffy like should sneak around and do all this stuff. Like, that's not Buffy Summers. Like, she shouldn't be Solid Snake. Like, do you not watch this TV show? And it just so that's the issue with so many licensed games. And for us, at the time reading reviews or anything like that, it's easy to be like, the developers don't know what they're doing. They don't care. And not knowing that they have some corporate overlord being like, it needs to be like this one game I played because that game's fucking amazing. So it should be like this. But it doesn't stealth doesn't make sense in the world of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like
Mhm.
where does
The
sneaking
industry is
around?
very reactionary.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's always the issue. And that shows so much in this section of it. And then it moves on to a a lot of Codemaster games, but one specifically that they touch upon, and clearly remember a lot of love being put into this, at least when it came into like reading magazines like EGM, GamePro, official PlayStation magazine. There was so much coverage of this game, and I don't know if either you two have played it, but John Carpenter's Jericho.
Mhm.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Clive Barker's Jericho. It's
Clive
Clive
Barker's
Barker's
Jericho,
Jericho.
yeah.
I got to play it when I was younger, because a friend of mine bought it, and it felt like nothing from what I read. And I remember being so disappointed in that game, even for the brief time I played it. And then to now watch this documentary and see how the pain in their eyes, like that they dealt
Yeah.
with and Clive dealt with, and like them not understanding Clive as a creator, as this visionary that he is in the horror space, and even to with video games, like how innovative he was with video games. Have either of you ever played this game, or was
I
this your first time
have.
you've seen it? Oh, you have, yeah.
Same thing. Actually, very much the same reaction I had to Silent Hill Downpour. I think I played like an hour or two of it, and I returned it back to GameStop.
Mm,
I
yeah.
just wasn't a fan at the time. I mean, I might be a fan now, going back into it, but back in the day, I just didn't like it.
Yeah, it was. It just felt like it got capped at its knees. Like, that's what
Mhm.
it felt like, and it was so disappointing. Fee, was this your first experience to, like, Clive Barker trying to get into video games?
Yeah, and now, like, as someone who has, like, oh my goodness. I made some notes on this because as someone who's watched Hellraiser and then seeing like what they did to that game, like I obviously I don't have a previous experience with Jericho, but then like instantly seeing some of the characters, I'm like, I feel like this is like the complete opposite of like the vibes of like Hellraiser and what they're like the preface and the idea of it, because you're like over sexualizing a character. I'm like, that is the complete opposite,
Mhm.
like, and at least from my experience with, like, Clive Barker's work. So it's very interesting to like it's just such a bummer, and I feel like that was such, like, a sign of the times, I guess, at that point, because what, this came out in 2000. Yeah, it came out in 2007. There was an issue with, like, taking IPs and then, like, hypersexualizing the women, and then, like, like, it became a meme, essentially, where, like, certain women and, like, it would be, like, guys in, like, massive amounts of gear and, like, heavy duty stuff, and then the women are, like, in a bathing suit, and it's just, like, this was, like, even just having that alone, so it is upsetting to see that, and I don't understand why they would allow it to get to that point, but mind you, it happens all the time, when people throw money at something and they're like, "Oh, but I like this," and it's just like, "This is gonna sell, women sell," or like, "Oh, this idea would really sell," making it like a shooter and then doing all this stuff to it. It's just like, but is that the preface of the story? But then they're like, "It's inspired by it," and it's like, at this point, you may as well just call it something else and then be like,
Yeah.
"We were inspired, but that's it." There was nothing, like, else. They could have called it something else, and then not have the actual same preface, so, I don't know, but that's kind of the sign of the times in 2007.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting that one of the people that we focus on a lot in the first two episodes, Brian Gomez, who we mentioned before, works on a bunch of these games, and you see almost like the disappointment every time he talks. He was integral in Downpour, and unfortunately that didn't get to play out the way he wanted. He's integral, and he has it's a really brilliant idea if you really think about it. Let's bring Clive Barker into horror, because horror games, should we say, into the
Mm.
gaming space, because he has such a unique vision of horror and a unique eye for it, where there could be sexualized things in his stories and his movies and stuff like that. They never feel like when you have this katana wielding, you know, busty samurai-esque person in Jericho like that. And they even show the original designs. That's not what she was supposed to be. And he has such a way where things could be sexual. Like even when you watch Candyman, for instance, right? His relationship with
Yeah.
the Virginia Madis's character is very interesting because he's like it. I'll try not to make it,
Like
but
obsessed,
yeah, he's
right?
obsessed. She's also like fawning over him in a weird way, even though he's like this dark force, and it's like it feels like very much the book talk girly thing that's going on
Yeah,
recently. Not making fun of
because
you,
he
kid.
like, if I remember right, he like takes away everything from her, so then he's kind of her only option. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, it is, and then there's this,
Mm.
like, weird, like, it only works because of the actors you have, like, in Tony Todd and in Virginia Madison in that movie, and then, you don't get it the same way in the next movies, or it's recontextualized in the remake or reboot, remake kinda thing from Nia DaCosta, but Clive Barker has such an interesting viewpoint when it comes to stuff because it's not sexualized, even though it looks like that. On the surface level, when you see the Cenobites, like there's these leather clad dominatrix
BSM,
weird
right?
things, but they're not. They're these manifestations of evil and like the just fucked upness and that's in his brain. He seems like such a well-adjusted human being, which is really funny enough. Uh Seeing a lot of his because he's not. When you see his work, he's definitely not.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing, and like I know Frank and I constantly joke around about it, but like Junji Ito is a
Yeah.
Yuji does
like
a
a
good one.
very explanation is like that man writes the most creepy, most unnerving like stuff.
Yeah.
But he then also has a manga about his wife's cats and his life with the cats, and then also likes to dress up and do like interviews where they take him and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna take you to the most haunted house. We're gonna take you to the Winchester house," and he's like, why is this door here? This seems really stupid. Like, there's no, like, he's not
Yeah.
scared. He's just like commenting on the architecture. He's like
He's
Yeah.
a
like,
dad just going around being like, this
I would
staircase
never put
is,
a door here.
yeah, he's just
Yeah, it
like,
doesn't make sense.
and then they're like, but it's really scary. And he's just like, this just seems like house that is not made correctly. I don't understand why you guys are taking me
No
here.
wonder somebody died in this house.
Yeah, he's like joking around. So it's like it's very like some people who like I feel more comfortable with people who like are able to be joking and like be like really silly or like seem like they're not that type of person and then like write like some crazy stuff.
Yeah,
But like
100%.
and I agree, like, quite frankly, the Cenobites literally are like they are a manifestation of, or like they're essentially their entire preface is like the interest of knowledge, and then also the like search for pleasure in any aspect. But then that doesn't even seem as sexualized as like some of
This
the
katana
characters in
wielding,
Jericho.
yeah. You're like,
I'm
Mhm.
like,
"What the fuck?" You're like, "This doesn't make sense." It just
Uh,
feels gross to be gross, like, but that was unfortunately a sign of the times in 2007, right?
um,
Um, it's an interesting parallel too, because again, we were talking about, like, "I have no mouth, I must scream," and that one section that we get just to see briefly where the woman is dealing with, like, a stalker-esque, like, unfortunately, something that a lot of women go through in real life, and she, punches him, and then that demon kinda goes away. That's 1996. Then you think about 10 years later in 2007, and here's this game developer like, "Let's make it more sexy." And here's the creative minds being like, "No, no, no, that's not the idea." It's like, "No, no, 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 it's fine. Don't worry. You'll just give her a katana and she's barely wearing anything. Hey, we'll put her in Playboy." And, like, they put these characters in
well,
Playboy.
that's right. They did that. They did that for. Funny enough, they did a Playboy shoot of a bunch of characters at the time.
Yeah,
Actually, funny enough,
Melina and Mortal
uh,
Kombat.
they
Yeah.
they had a character from Splinter Cell, if I remember correctly.
ew.
Right?
I want to
You're like,
say
"Why?"
the mascot of Microsoft at the time, because this is early 360 era when this issue happened. I want to say Joanna Dark was in there. I might be wrong on that one.
Me?
I don't remember. I don't remember all of them that were in there. I know Melina was in there. I know Enrica from Splinter Cell was in there. I don't remember the other one. Oh, Saints Row 2 character was in one of them.
Yeah. Blood Rain.
Blood Rain.
Yeah.
I
Heavy
don't like
Rain,
it.
yeah. Yeah, I don't, yeah, it doesn't make sense, especially when you have something like, I know, again, Time, Melina wears crazy outfits, but I could not imagine the Melina of Mortal Kombat 2 and or Mortal Kombat 1 where we are at now in the series posing for Playboy. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, none of these characters should have been on here. Dead or Alive is, like, even crazy, yeah, like, the characters from Jericho. Apparently, there's a character from The Witcher. Like, why? Why is this the thing? Like, why was this a thing? And that was such a I remember websites just talking about stuff like this, and this game Jericho is barely out, and their main goal is sexualized content, not horror, not focusing on gameplay mechanics, not, focusing on a creative vision, something to tie in something. Like, again, when you have a game like, Downpour or Homecoming where a lot of people are like, "Hey, this aspect doesn't is not fun, but this aspect is." Like, you could tell there's some kind of creative idea that they wanted, but
Um,
there's nothing here in Jericho, and that was the most disappointing thing. Like, I remember playing it, and yeah, maybe the gameplay mechanics wouldn't have hit the same, but the fact that they do this unnecessary thing, even back then, even being like a teenager in 2007, like, why? Like, this is like what they're targeting. They're targeting like a 15-year-old Carlos, and I'm like, no, I'm good. That's not why I want this game. I've watched how many Clive Barker, inspired movies or how many movies he's directed himself. Like, I don't want this. I want horror stuff. And you just use this guy's name for in vain. And poor Brian Gomez, you see him like he's like keeps trying. And luckily he does get a success because the next game is something that we actually covered on Point of Progress. Frank did a whole playthrough of one of these games, Evil Dead.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was
Good
really
games.
interesting. Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah.
They're fun.
I have nothing wrong. I would argue, especially Regeneration. I don't really have much to complain about for an Evil Dead game. It's about as good of an Evil Dead game as you're gonna get at that time, at least.
Yeah, it was like the first W for Brian Gomez.
I feel
He
bad too
needed
because
it.
like I really
He
want to go
needed it.
back and try Downpour again because I feel like maybe I just misunderstood Downpour at that time. But Jericho definitely no. Yeah,
No.
that's definitely a difference of that whoever was telling them there's a difference between like Clive Barker's horror and a difference between grindhouse horror.
Yes.
And that person was very much grindhouse horror loving, and Clive Barker is very much like, you know, actual serious horror loving. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
very, very clashing distinctivenesses there.
Yeah. So shout out to Brian for getting a W in those Evil Dead games because they definitely have a cult following and they're good.
I love them. They're good.
The next game that they tackle in this Lost in Translation part, which I thought was interesting, because then we go from like negative sides to then starting like an upswing when we're talking about you know, things that are feel adapted. Deadly Premonition.
Oh,
I did not expect that to be covered on here because I didn't, in my mind, I didn't see it as a horror game. I've never played those games. I know they're loved by like very
very
cult.
Twin Peaks.
Yeah,
Very Twin
very Twin
Peaks.
Peaks. Um, this section, I mean, to me, of course, you know, not to shout out, you know, shows that we do here, but playing it's not a loop, or sorry, playing Alan Wake for it's not a loop. Um, that feels very Twin Peaks. I thought that would have been something perfect kind of for this section, but they focus on Deadly Premonition, and watching this was so interesting. Like I've never played this game. I don't know, have you guys ever
I
touched it?
have. I
Okay.
have played
No.
Deadly Premonition.
It looks weird.
There's a specific version of Deadly Premonition you want to play. So I got halfway through the game and I was like, shit, I want to play the definitive version, and I could never find a copy of it. So I think it's like the PS3 version, I want to say. Like it's hard to play on PC because it's not optimized for PC like at all. So you really have to play like I think it's the 360 version. I think the PS3 version you can find almost anywhere, but there's a Xbox 360 version, and that's the version you want to play because it has like the least amount of glitches, it has the best sound in it and everything. But because it's like a cult classic game, nobody has a copy of it, and it's also really like the last time I checked was really expensive to buy. So I played halfway through it. It's a good game. I played it after watching Twin Peaks because I'm like, holy shit, this game is just Twin Peaks the game.
Yeah, even the director, you know, the creative director of that game is like, yeah, no, this is what it is. Like, I love Twin Peaks, so I made my own version.
Yeah,
and I think there's
Coffee and
a unity.
donuts.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, exactly.
They
And I
almost
think
they very much directly reference a lot of Twin Peaks in that. Like it's really good.
Yeah, I think there's a special space for games that could be homages specifically, or almost
I'm hoping that's
correlations.
a future episode because there's a lot there where I'm like, we talk about Max Payne 3. Oh, sorry, not Max Payne. Max Payne 1 with
Yeah,
the baby scene and
that's
the
true.
nightmare, like games like that. When you go through all these horror games, you realize how much Twin Peaks has influenced a ton of them.
Mhm.
Evil Within, Max Payne, you know what I mean? Like they directly reference this thing, and I thought it was kind of strange how we didn't mention that in the documentary. But I got a feeling there's gonna be like an episode where there's like where filmmakers influence like gaming, and I think there's got to be a thing for David Lynch there because like not only RP his soul, he influenced a lot of these horror games. A lot of these horror games do draw a lot of Twin Peaks references and like kind of homages in it, and I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then before the epilogue, this section wraps around something we talked about before recording. And Fee, you said you wanted like a whole hour and a half documentary on this
Oh hell yeah!
specifically, and it has the space to it. You guys have opened my eyes up. I do need to sit down and actually play this game. But Dead by Daylight.
Oh my god. I wanted to just have them continue to talk for like the next like 3 hours because the amount of like knowing now that it was like based off of like the naughty teddy bear games.
That's
Oh
insane.
then-
yeah,
I
and
did
then
not pick that up.
I didn't pick that up either.
yeah, it was like that was wild. And then like they talked about the fact that like because when it first started off they only had those 3 killers, and then they were able to get Michael, and then they were able to like build off of that. And not even just that, it's like, of course, it gives that opportunity to not only just be like like obviously the survivors, but you can also be the killer. And then not only that, there's also like a third person view because of when you're a survivor, you have that full range of view. But then of course with the killer, to make it difficult for you, is it is in first person. So then it's just like just those aspects, and then they're constantly adding new content. They're looking for different collaborations, and it was so cool for them to talk about the fact that, like, they were able to get all these, like, characters and bring them in, but then they were able to get characters like Pyramid Head, they were able to get characters from Resident Evil, and they were talking about the fact that, like, at this point, we were getting like, IPs and being able to work with people who are not peers, but people who inspired us to get into this and be able, like, to get into video games, to get into horror genre. And it's just it's so freaking good. And the love that you can tell that what they put in, like, whether it's like a purchased IP, or if it's just like a character that they've made up themselves, there are stories upon stories on their backgrounds, and some of the killers are related in some capacity. Um, then there's like some of the survivors that have like relationships with each other, let alone some of the survivors are like in some capacity have like a relationship with the killers. So it's such an intertwined. I just want to listen to them talk for hours about this because there's so much
I
there.
I
Eh,
would have to bet there's, like, so much cutting room floor material, specifically about this
Oh yeah.
episode, you know? This episode specifically, I would have to assume there's so much on the cutting room floor that they had to,
How
like
many episodes did you say this was?
5.
5.
5. So they got about at least 3 more hours of
Yeah.
content.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Yeah, you would have to think, and how you guys talk about Dead by Daylight makes me wanna, like, jump in. Like, I think I have downloaded because of Game Pass. We do have to sit down and eventually, like, try it out, but the amount of IPs that them proving themselves of being able to carry, like, a horror game and being this, like, new horror game for, like, a new generation. It's easy, drop in, drop out. Like, you don't have to you could do 1 match, and that could fulfill your night, and you'll be like, "I'm going to bed. I don't have to do it anymore." Like, you feel fulfilled and full from playing, that little bit for, gaming for that night or whatever, or spend hours and hours and hours of playing this map and doing this map and having the ability to be, "Hey, I'm gonna play as, Nancy fighting Michael Myers, or, Billy the Puppet, for whatever reason, or, I'm sorry, it's the pig face, right? For Saul, interacting with Laurie Strode, how would that work out? And it feels like playing with action figures, but they all happen to be horror based,
Mhm.
and they have their own, like you mentioned, and there's this lore that they've built up over, so many years of content. They said that this game it's a decade they've been out at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Surprising too, because it
It
was
doesn't
one
feel
of
like a
those games
decade.
without, honestly, without that collaboration from Halloween, that game would have died a long time ago. It was very much at its close to its deathbed before that Halloween update.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, for myself, when I first played it, I'm like, I don't like this. I was not a fan of the game. But then, like, looking into like I I'm okay, guys. We've come to the conclusion that I'm just obsessed with lore, but like it's just the
Oh yeah.
entire idea. Like, of course, yes, there is the idea that you are one of the survivors or the killer. You have to create these generators to be able to get out. But then the idea, the reason why even these people are here in the first place is because of the entity. So it's like it's trying to consume as many souls as it can. And so it's essentially like bringing these killers into this like arena to be able to enjoy and be able to indulge in these people's souls and have them repeatedly get murdered on a repetitive motion. It's like it's just so interesting, and it's just oh my god, it's just so
It's
good. And
it's really fun. It's really
yeah,
good. Um, I I would say if we ever want to do play it, let's do a private lobby. I don't think current Dead by Daylight is very fun. It's very much a anybody who's still playing it is very locked into the meta of the game that makes it very hard for anybody who's either returning or new to the game to be able to have any kind of fun with it because they basically just troll the shit out of you. But I think some of the most fun we've ever had playing the game was like when we had a group of people, and you only really need one more because I think it's what four survivors, one
killer.
one killer, so we need like 2 people. You can
Oh yeah,
probably get Mario to play or
There you
something.
go.
there we
Boom.
go. And going into when we were initially talking about like a couple months ago, of possibly playing for like Halloween streams, I was looking at the amount of IPs that they have, and they touch upon it
Mhm.
like a little bit in the documentary, but like they have Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, Saw, video game stuff like Resident Evil, like you mentioned, but they also have Castlevania. Like, and
Yeah, that was
you
a good
know,
one.
Yeah.
again, this is a series that doesn't get enough love, right? And we criticize it so much. We want more Castlevania. We do. Obviously, they have the advanced collections, and people are buying that because we want Castlevania any way, shape, or form. But all these other IPs are like, hey, listen, if you're not going to do it, can I do something with the IP? And Konami's like, sure, whatever, pay us money. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And Dead by Daylight is doing something fun with, Castlevania, keeping that IP in the zeitgeist where it could easily fade away, or there's these, it, it does something interesting that just watching from like, someone on the outside who hasn't been able to put too much, like, I think I made maybe half an hour. I think I'm still maybe done the tutorial, in Dead by Daylight, and you can see something special there. You can see that they have a love, a care, and attention there. I thought that was an interesting way to end this, like, this specific episode, before we get into like what's going to be the future in horror and kind of teasing that up, but ending it on Dead by Daylight. And I have a note here, like it was interesting to start the second episode of the docuseries by showing Texas Chainsaw on Atari, and then at the end showing Dead by Daylight with Leatherface.
Mhm.
Like that he like this horror icon. They don't really talk about it, but visually, he was at almost the beginning of gaming and he's still around to this day. Interesting.
He will never
It's
die.
so cool. Yeah.
Almost at the beginning of the zeitgeist of horror too, when you think about it
Mm-hmm.
too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some legends just don't die.
Yeah, and then it ends with what a lot of people they talk a lot of the people in this episode cameos. Obviously, we talked about like Corey Taylor from Slipknot, Brian Gomez, and a lot of the other people we've dealt with in the previous episode. They talk about where they see VR or see horror going in gaming, and a lot of them mention VR. And Fee, like you mentioned, you played Seven in VR. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine. And it
It
not
Oh
even
yeah,
from a
it's
motion
good.
sickness standpoint, just the fear. That game is scary
Mhm.
on a TV.
Yeah. I didn't get to, like, full transparency. I did not get far, but when I like where I got was insane. Like it
Mhm,
was intense, like walking through like the underbelly of the house, being attacked and stabbed, being thrown around consistently, being like constantly unnerved. And it's a wild time. And I think that there are definitely opportunities. My only slight concern about VR and horror games is it gets like almost like, and I know we kind of we touched base a little bit about the late 2000s, but something that became very gimmicky is like 3D in
mm,
movies, where it's just like they were making the movies be not for like like, of course it was cool to be able to see it in 3D, but there's definitely watching those movies back now, you're like, okay, this was very gimmicky because I
yep,
know that they were doing this because of 3D. um Freaking Final Destination, for example.
yep.
Um,
My Belated
it was
Valentine, yeah. Mhm,
yeah, things like that. It was just like, okay, so now looking back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, this was definitely because you were hoping for that scare factor. That is my only slight concern with VR with horror games is like, is it going to become gimmicky where it's just like, oh, I see, this is the reason why you did this is kind of for that particular kind of like gimmicky moment. But I don't like it's definitely a small fear. I don't think it's going to happen. It's just a slight concern that I have because it's just probably living through the mid 2000s and late 2000s where we were just plagued with it at all the time.
mhm,
But yeah, I'm curious to see where they go with it. I want to see kind of like we are seeing a lot of new innovations with indie when it comes to horror because where others like we of course we have AAA horror games, but a lot of the cool intriguing like things that like make you really think are like the small indies. I know Inscription isn't considered a full horror, but the amount of game mechanics in that game is insane.
mhm,
Like the different change ups, the different like feelings of it. And it goes back to even the soundscapes because there are times where like there's one moment where there's a lot of sound and then all of a sudden it's silence. and you're like, I'm more terrified now when being outside of the cabin than I am inside there. Like, what the hell?
It's like the unknown, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really like, I'm excited. I'm really curious to see what people are going to be putting out. Of course, we're kind of ramping up to things like Summer Game Fest, where we're going to see a lot more and see kind of like clips and glimpses of what the sphere is going to be like for the next 2 years.
Mhm.
So I'm hopeful. I just hope that people are also excited for innovation, because I love the gaming space, but I also know that sometimes the gaming space does not like change even though they really want change. So I'm curious to see what goes on there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Looking ahead though, I will say I do have the titles for the next 3 episodes. And not to diminish what like episode 3 is going to be titled Narrative Nightmares. We don't have any descriptions like what it specifically tackles in the episode itself, but I'm assuming just narrative focused games are going to be highlighted in that.
My
Episode
favorite.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Like fee shit. That's what it should be called. Episode 4 and 5 are to me feel like they're gonna be the most interesting, and I would be down. Like obviously we don't have access to those next 3 episodes, but I kind of hope they're almost like 2 hours long because episode 4 is titled The Indie Revolution, which we've
Yes.
touched upon throughout this whole discussion for the review. And obviously, full disclosure, we're friends with everyone like at 6-1 Indie. We've worked with them before in various, capacities and things like that. But like they champion indie so much and specifically indie horror. I it's the most interesting place to see horror.
Mhm.
There's always something innovative coming out of the indie space that, Fee, I think I was messaging you about New Blood Interactive. They have a game called Al Sonoma or something like that. I forget what it was called. But
Mm.
it's like point and click, kind of pixel art, and then it goes to real full motion video, like 2025, like full on movie mode, and it's so horrifying to see some of the stuff that you see there. Frank, I know you played Faith, which they had the director cameos in talks in episode 1 and 2. Um, Mouthwashing, I recently played, and Click Holding are two of the most disturbing games I've ever played, and they're short, they're sweet, they're perfect. They don't like waste your time. This is the beauty of indies, especially like being a parent, is like you can spend time and actually complete a game and feel rewarded in that sense. And you get these kind of like interesting things that you could do. Mouthwashing was one of the most disturbing games I've played. And, you know, I love, for context, I love movies like Event Horizon. I've played all 3 Dead Space, but currently I'm playing Dead Space Remake. And it took it to, like, another cerebral level with mouthwashing, and there's so many other games that we can go gush and more and more and more about, but I think episode 4, I hope is, like, their longest episode because I think it's gonna be the most important episode that they're gonna release, when it comes to horror and video games. Because I think more and more, like, yes, we love our Resident Evils. I can't wait for Resident Evil 9 whenever that gets announced. I hope Code Veronica gets ported, into a remake. I want to see remakes of Silent Hill 1 and 3. We were just talking many times. I saw Homecomings on, Steam. That'd be interesting to play nowadays, now in 2025. And maybe Downpour will get ported one day. I know GOG just put up a definitive edition of Silent Hill 4 The Room. Like, these AAA games are very important, and yes, we love them. I love me a Dino Crisis and things like that, but indies is where it's at. And I think it's one of the most interesting fields within gaming, whether it be anything. You want a JRPG or something that plays like something you played back in the day? Sea of Stars. You want horror, mouthwashing. You want, Super Lucky's Tale, something like that. You want these games are there for your nostalgia heart, or they're adapted to a new format. They evolve the game.
Well, like, there's things as well, like, we're seeing even, like, indie movie, like, production groups are making games, like Bloomhouse Games. Like,
Yeah.
they have currently Fear of Spotlight, which I'm really excited. I just bought it because it was actually in a bundle with, Killer Frequency, and I'm like, I've been really wanting to check out this game." I loved, like, seeing clips of it last year at Summer Games Fest. and just being able to see like what people are doing, because it's really interesting to see kind of like the turning point that we're seeing right now with like especially with indies, where they're taking like the games and the nostalgia feeling of like the games that are coming out in the early 2000s, and they're making their video games look like that. And I think it's really cool to be able to see like we're not just trying to make everything look high definition. Sure, it's really cool to be able to see the pores of my character, but I'd rather have like a really fantastic story and like a really cool art style than being able to see like every wrinkle that this like particular character has on their face kind of thing. Um and yeah, no, of course, like you said, AAA games are like going to be there consistently, and I think that's like there's a place for them, but I think there's a huge space right now for indies, because we get to see like whether it's a one person crew or it's like like a few dozen people working on a video game. I think there's like opportunities to tell a bunch of stories that way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Definitely.
if yeah, finally the last episode, which I also find is going to be one of the most interesting. Again, not to take away from what we watched. Episode 3 seems like it's going to seem awesome, but 5 seems like one of the most interesting ones they're going to touch upon, and it's called Cursed and Controversial. And the
Yeah.
thumbnail for it is Manhunt. So this is going to be
Yeah.
a very interesting episode because I think they touch about Manhunt. They queue up Night Trap early in, I
Yeah.
believe, episode 1. So that has to be touched upon. I'm sure they'll.
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat's like
It's
horror adjacent, so I'm sure they'll talk about it in some
Yeah,
capacity.
this is where you're gonna have the, I think I touched upon it earlier, the panic that people would have over a
Mhm.
lot of these games being like distributed out there. I was funny enough because like at our closing thoughts, I was gonna mention like I thought it was kind of weird how we didn't mention Mortal Kombat, because Mortal Kombat has these horror characters in there and has a very horrific setting, but not having Manhunt, I was like, no Manhunt, like that game was scary as shit. Like Pigsy, we're not gonna talk about
Yeah.
Pigsy at all, like. But it seems like, yeah, we're gonna talk about that, and honestly that makes sense for the segment because that game was, both Manhunt 1 and 2 were controversial, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like the talk around that. I remember it clearly, and it was really it was crazy to see at the time, and it was I remember it was getting close. There was like Senate hearings, I feel like, and crazy shit just going on left and right about that game. Um, I feel like as well, we touched upon it earlier when we talked about PT, like them tackling, you know, themes that aren't talked about. Yeah, I know. I'm looking
Mhm.
behind you too. It's hilarious. But talking about themes that you don't necessarily talk about a lot. Night Trap too is such an interesting way. I think again we talked about them a bunch, but I think Night Dive also just republished like
Mhm.
a remastered version of that, and it's on Switch. It's on a Nintendo console, and, like, that was the see, Nintendo doesn't play these games, this is a Genesis thing, like, that was part of the
Yeah,
Senate hearings, and here we are.
Genesis does when Nintendo don't.
Yeah, and here we are in 2025, and it's on a Nintendo console. Like, what is the irony in that? Like, I hope they
Yeah.
touch upon that in this, um, but I think it's easy to say, obviously, full disclosure, we got these 2 episodes for review, as we mentioned. There's an affiliate link that, helps us as a channel, gives us some kickback, but it is really easy to say that this is a really good documentary from the first 2 episodes, and seeing the subject matter that we have for the next 3 makes it even like, my palate is already wet, like, I can't wait to see especially episodes 4 and 5.
Mhm.
For closing thoughts, what do you guys think of these first 2 episodes? We'll start with Fee.
I am fully invested. Like I seriously, I want to watch the other three, whether it's us all three, three of us sitting down for a few hours and watching
Mhm,
them together, which I think would be really cool. But I love watching and hearing people getting excited and passionate about something that they love, and this is definitely what we're seeing in these particular two documentaries, and two episodes. We're seeing people who are passionate about this particular genre, these particular games, seeing the excitement that they have. If this was made any other way, where it was just people reading off information, I would have been not gonna lie, I don't know if I would have been able to make it through it. But this
mhm,
was a lot of it's a passion project, of course, but also seeing people who are just so dedicated to this particular genre. And there's a girl there who has a doctorate in horror games.
I
Like she
forgot
How do
about
I
that.
get a
Yeah.
doctorate in horror games? I
Dude,
kind of want
that's
one.
one of my notes. I forgot. I wanted to touch upon that. Let me real quick. I don't mean to cut you off, Fee, but I did one of my favorite notes here, and I said it out loud while watching it in front of some people. Yes, I want to be a doctoral video game researcher like Caitlin Blackmore. What a cool fucking title to have. Was my note.
Mhm.
I also just put what a fucking badass name.
Dude, yeah,
Caitlin
that
Blackmore.
she's just badass all around. Like, I need to know more of her life. Like, I'm so invested.
Yes.
When I was watching this, we were like, oh yeah, John Carpenter, and we're talking to, Clive Barker stuff, and I was like, yeah, interesting. And then her name popped up. Like, that's a cool name. But that's a cool aesthetic that she has. There's like doctoral in video game research. I'm like, what the fuck? I do like put the doctor in front of her name. Don't I would put the doctor right in front of her name every time. Like, you're gonna
Yeah.
respect me. You're gonna call me Dr. Caitlin, okay?
It's just wild, and it's like I honestly, when I first saw the time and I messaged you, I'm like, "Oh my god, this is gonna be very long." I didn't feel like it would like, watching it, I didn't feel like I
Mm.
watched something that was an hour and 30 minutes. I felt like I watched, like, a 30-minute episode, and I'm like, "I need more." And then, of course, I watched the 1 hour, and I'm like, "Okay, first of all, this is shorter, so now this feels like it's 20 minutes, and I
Yeah.
need more of this." So I'm so interested and curious to see, especially with things like talking about indie video games, and just overall. So I honestly, for a documentary, this is high up there for me. And as someone who's a true horror fan, it means a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Oh, you know what's funny? Frank, if you don't mind, real quick, I do want to touch upon this. I just happened to be clicking on our affiliate link for the episode. It's similar to a Kickstarter. There's different tiers. You can get all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Two things to note before I finish. First of all, with the link that we have in here, if you want to purchase like whatever, if you want to be a producer on, there's like $1,500 plus shipping and whatever. You don't have to do that again. Full disclosure. Frank, they did a FPS documentary, a 4-hour FPS
Oh god,
documentary.
I might have to watch it.
Yeah, that might be something we have to do. But they also have quick little details of episode 3, 4, and 5. So if you guys don't mind for a moment, I'll just go through that real
Sure.
quick.
Mhm.
Episode 3, narrative nightmares, from the surreal and unique to the quiche and niche and campy. We explore the rise and fall of full motion video game horror, celebrating Night Trap, Seventh Guest, Sierra Online's classics Phasmagoria, Gabriel Knight, before examining the genre's surprising rebirth over the past decade. And then they talked to Sam Barlow and stuff because he's already been mentioned before. We didn't touch upon that. Episode 4, Indie Revolution. We shine a light on indie development and horror gaming, from breakouts hits like Five Nights at Freddy's and Amnesia to the many unique and one of a kind experiences like Iron Lung, Lost in Vivo, and Faith. And then episode 5, our final episode, we dive down the rabbit hole of controversy and explore the games like Doom, Manhunt, and Rule of Rose, which I've never heard of.
Oh, Rule of Roses. That's
okay.
a $300 game. That's why you've never heard of it.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah,
It is
I
very expensive to get a copy of Rule of Rose. And it's
Gotcha.
very rare.
Yeah, so these games people wanted banned. Along the way, we'll also look into the unusual world of cursed games, including urban legends, there's creepypastas like Polybius and Ben Drowned. And then they talked to John Romero some more. Kimura, who was the scenario writer for Rule of Roses, and some other people in there. So yeah, it's interesting. There's also merchandise you can get and stuff like that. But I wanted to touch upon what they kind of talk about in those 3 episodes. So, Frank, can I get your closing thoughts on this?
I like the
these 3 episodes?
documentary very much. Like I said, there were some omissions where I'm like, yeah, I would want to talk about certain games. But then now that I'm seeing that there's a possibility those games will be coming up later on, I don't really see that as a fault. I would pop if we start talking about The Suffering, because I'm 90% sure I'm the only one who remembers that game.
No,
Like there was
I
two
remember.
of them.
Yeah, there was 2,
There was
right?
2 of them. Midway. You know what I mean? Had really cool monsters and really cool gameplay. Nobody seems to remember that game for some reason.
Sorry, it was in the jail, right? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, first one's in a jail / asylum, and then the second one is in Baltimore. Like you're getting
just
like
as frightening.
monsters made from like the history of like racism in Baltimore and stuff like that. It's so fucking cool. not racism, but the idea of using,
Full preference.
the
Racism not cool.
no,
The
racism
suffering,
isn't cool, but the
cool.
idea of like using monsters based on how people died in very horrific ways is so fucking cool. But yeah, I like the documentary. I really like how structured the first episode is. It's very much the evolution, whereas the second episode is very much like adaptations of, where the horror genre was already there, so they had to adapt a lot of these already pre-existing horror things that people associated with it into video games. I thought all of that was really good. I thought it was really well done. Like Fee said, it didn't feel like an hour, it felt more like 20 minutes, which may sound crazy, but if you ever lived the dual monitor life, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
I think it's well structured. I love the cameos, bro. John Romero talking about Resident Evil 4 was something I never thought I would hear.
Never in my life. Never in my life.
We think of these people, these like icons of gaming, and we forget that they're also gamers themselves, and they had to have played these other games. You know what I mean? So just seeing them talk about and gush over their fan favorite games and how it inspired them, or and how it inspired future games in their catalog, or even just talking about like, dude, I just love fucking Resident Evil 4. There's nothing Resident Evil 4 in any of John Romero's work, but goddamn, he loves the game, right? Like it's so cool to see, and I honestly, it's given me a new light into a lot of these games that I thought I've already had most of the information on already. And I think that's the point of a documentary, is to kind of entertain you, but at the same time educate you, right? Like teach you something new, even that you might have not have known. If like me, I watch retrospectives all the time. Some of the shit that happens in this documentary, I never would have known. You know what I mean? And then like I said, the second episode, I love seeing all the influences. I love the idea that some of these developers know that their games were swing and misses, right? And to see that admission, like, yeah, we tried, and we really wanted it to be this, but budget, bosses and everything like that made it into that, right? It makes me a lot less jaded on certain titles. Like I said, Silent Hill Downpour. I really do want to go back and play Silent Hill Downpour after hearing him talk about it, because I feel like I didn't give that game a fair shake when it came out, and now that I kind of have more context on it from the people who made it, I kind of want to go try it and see if it holds up. You know what I mean? I'm probably not gonna do a whole looking back episode on it, but I definitely want to at some point go back and try it out. So I think it was very good, and honestly, we're looking well forward to the next episodes there. I wouldn't even mind like if we all just sat down, watched it together, or if we even sat down and streamed an episode. You know what I mean? Just like kind of gush over an episode and talk about it, give our own little commentary on it. I think it would be really cool. But yeah, I'm excited to see the future episodes. Like I said, my only complaint was that it was missing some games that I think contextually should be there, like the Suffering and like other games. I had a list of games on top of my head, but now I don't even want to list them, because I'm just like, it's gonna probably show up in the next few episodes anyway, like Manhunt. So we'll see. I'm excited.
Yeah, I would say for me, I really, really love this. I love documentaries when they're specifically niche, and like I watched a 6 hour, Friday the 13th documentary, and I was enthralled all 6 hours. I stopped to like use the restroom and eat. That was it. And I ate in front of the TV so I can keep watching, because I was just enthralled at what I was watching. I watched a 4 hour documentary on, Nightmare on Elm Street. And when you have a writer, a director similar to what we have here, and Richard Moss, and the producer Daniel Richardson, again, thank you, for allowing us to watch the first 2 episodes. When you have someone, you could tell they love gaming, they love horror gaming, and it shows. And the amount of people that they were able to get for this, just even the first 2 episodes, and then seeing everyone else, and when you see like the press kit, it's like, holy shit, guys, like you guys went for broke. And it really shows the love and care and dedication that you guys have for this. um it really interesting aesthetic that they have here. My only complaint, and it's literally, it's nothing, it was more like it reminded me of the Pokemon. It's like, "Who's this Pokemon?" It's like, "It's Pikachu." It's like, "It's like a son of a bitch." Like, it felt like that when they would do this whole screen and you see all these beautiful classic,
Oh yeah.
games, and then it starts focusing in. I'm like, "Oh shit, which one's it gonna be? Is it gonna be this? It's gonna be that?" And then it's like, "Oh, are we gonna talk about Fatal Frame Rate?" Like, no, Silent Hill. Is like, I'm not disappointed, but god damn it, I don't thought it was this one. It was this one. Or you see like another game next to it, like, I thought you were gonna talk about that one. Fuck, I wanted to hear about that one right now. But they do such a good job that it's not really a complaint. It's like a superfluous like complaint that was like, I want more. I just want more from these guys. They're so good. And now the carrot at the end is like for Frank being there's a 4-hour documentary on first person
Yeah.
shooters with Cliff Bazinski, they're talking to Cliff and Cliffy B and everything like that. I was like, oh no, we're gonna lose Frank. We're gonna lose Frank
Yeah.
for a couple
Or
hours.
at least a couple.
These guys have a special sauce, and I'm really interested to see the next 3 episodes. It's really cool. You can tell like it's not I don't want to say professional, we're not videographers or anything like that, but like it comes from a place of love. There's like uh it's more of a passion project than a like I want to say not professional or anything like that. It just seems like there's like little things. Of course, these are also not full disclosure, not final copies that we watched. There's a disclosure on laser watermark on these episodes that things could change, editing details and things like that could change. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I think they did a really competent job. I've seen again a shitload of documentaries, and these were really good. I think they hold up. I think them having more of a personality to them, I think had me love it more, you know, than something from like I don't know, like Michael Moore, something like that, similar like that. But yeah, that's our thoughts on the first 2 episodes on Terabytes and this, very lengthy discussion of these 2 episodes. All of us highly recommend, you watch this. Again, the affiliate link will be down below. It has all the tiers, so if you want to support the creators, it also supports us here at Point in Progress. Um, if not, also I will just also link straight up just a trailer for their thing, just if you want to take a look. It should be out in April. Of course, they are doing like a paid campaign, so they want you to buy it. There's Blu-rays you can get. There's the soundtrack. I think if you buy any tier, you get this FPS one we just mentioned at the end. You also get that documentary. There's so many loads of things. You can check out the page down below. Um,
Mhm.
and we'll just kind of go around the horn and everyone pip their stuff. Fee, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me here. You can also find me over at twitch.tv/Serenix, where I'm going to be playing some of these games this weekend. I also have some other games I need to play. Funny enough, the discussion quite often in this was talking about Lovecraftian. So I'm probably going to be checking out some of the later Sherlock Holmes games, which I know some have like some sort of supernatural elements to
I've
it.
heard of this. Yeah.
And also checking out some other games. So yes, did I in fact buy I have no mouth, but I must scream while we were doing this? Absolutely. Did I take a screenshot? 100%. You can also find me over at Carpool Gaming, where I do the Xbox Drive every Friday live on YouTube and on Twitch. At Carpool Gaming Live, and then youtube.com/carpool gaming, where we talk about all things Xbox, and I talk about PC games and cloud gaming, and also just video games in general that are on Xbox. So yeah, that's me, and I also yell at my co-host sometimes. It's like I'm home.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where you can find me on the internet.
Frank, where can people find you?
You can find me on the X at the Frank GV, TikTok at the Frank GV, and YouTube at the Frank GV. Or actually, no, YouTube is just Frank GV. The Frank GV brings up some fucking random Mexican dude from like doing like music videos, AMVs, and shit. But you can also find me on Point in Progress, where I do videos every now and again. We just published one called Looking Back. It's a series that I'm working on where we're funny enough, a lot of what a lot of us are probably about to do, which is go play a game from our past and see if it holds up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to do a pseudo episode in my head for Silent Hill Downpour, but if enough people want Silent Hill Downpour to be a looking back episode, I'll definitely
Yeah.
do one. Um,
It's Brian
But right
Gomez in
now,
like the chat. Like, please. Like, oh, okay.
please,
Yeah.
please, Brian Gomez. I might just do it just for you because I feel bad about hating that game. But Max Payne went really well. I think the video actually went really well. So please, if you like Max Payne and want to hear me rant about it for 25 minutes, it is on our YouTube channel. And look forward to the next one, which is going to be a horror game. Spoiler, but I'm not going to spoil which one. You got to watch the video. There's a little hint of it at the end. So
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, it's a really good video. You did a really good job.
thank you.
Yeah, for me, you can find me here, Point in Progress, youtube.com/Point in Progress, where me and Sly do DC Graduates, where we tell you that DC movies can be good as long as they're animated. We are currently in season 3. But yeah, you can watch any season, doesn't matter. You've watched the movie before, are you interested in watching the movie? Hop into the chat, listen to us talk about it and gush about this movie or not gush about it. There's like very few movies where like, this is not that good. Most of them surprisingly hold up really well, these animated movies. But right now we're talking about a DC animated universe. So that's everything post Flashpoint Paradox. And like what did we just talk about this week? I'm trying to think. Justice League versus Teen Titans. That's what we just recorded this week. So that's a little spoiler for a future episode. Down the line, we have bonus episodes, which I'll remind you if you signed up for. Just Suicide Squad Isekai. We're gonna watch Suicide Squad.
That's a good one.
Isekai. And we're going to talk about that because I forgot that it existed. And I went on Max to look for one of these Justice League movies. Like, oh, shit, that's on there. I was like, Sly's not going to watch anime, but Fee will. Done.
I will.
Exactly. So we have some cool bonus episodes and cool guests coming down the line as well. And then that's also on audio platforms as well. And you can find me as well doing It's Not a Loop, which is our Remedyverse playthrough series where I play the Remedyverse games for the very first time. Speaking of horror games, I played Alan Wake Remastered and Alan Wake American Nightmare, which surprisingly, very scary. I know Alan Wake 2 is really scary, from what a lot of people say. I haven't played these games, so I don't know. I didn't expect 1 to be as scary as it was. I thought it was just like this fun, weird Twin Peaky thing. I didn't realize there was a lot of objective horror. And shout out people. But yeah, It's Not a Loop. It's a Spiral of season 1. It's Not a Loop. It's Quantum Break just wrapped. That is season 2 where we play, I'll say, Quantum Break. And my little break should be over soon, and we're going to be jumping into it. It's Not a Loop. It's Control, which is something highly requested by so many people when I announced the series that I play Control. So I'm very excited to jump into the world of Control. I have no clue again what's going on. I just saw that multiplayer thing that I shared with Frank. I was like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. I don't understand why they're sticky.
Looks good.
I don't know why they're sticky note monsters, but fuck it, we'll find out. I
It's
guess
in the game. There is a reference to that monster in the game, so you'll have to find out.
Nice. I'm in for more just weirdness that comes from Remedyverse games. And then yeah, personally, you can find me youtube.com/nerdaday. I've kind of teased and bullied myself into like slowly getting back into the groove on that over there. And then we have Chaos Bringers. That's eventually going to come back once we record episode 5, which is Final Fantasy 5. And Frank's played 6, Harv's played 6. I have to play 6 still. So once I get some free time to play Final Fantasy 6, only one of the best RPGs ever, then we'll talk about it. But till next time, progress has been made.
Yeah.
Bye.